creating things on your own and continue learning in the book or future trainings. Sounds like uh, no confusion today. Good. I'm glad. All right. Not new to Fusion. Learn a few new tricks. Great. Excellent. I hope you learned some new tricks today as well. So let's see. Yesterday, let's look at this agenda here. Yesterday, we did an intro to Fusion. We talked about the interface, just getting comfortable within it, and then nodes. What the heck are nodes? We covered that a bit. It is a different way of working from most video editors, as well as other types of compositing or editing, motion graphics apps, any of that that tend to use layers. So we're getting comfortable with nodes, and if you're still not comfortable with nodes, that's okay. These things take time. Just watch, learn, and then practice on your own time. Sometimes just letting it sink in and then trying it on your own later, and experimenting. These lessons are a guideline. You can do other things if you're following along, or as you practice later, do slightly different things. And I think a great way to learn is just opening up some of these practice materials, especially going to the complete, the end timeline where some of these are already done for you. And you can go in there and just start changing parameters or swap out a node and just see what it does. Because there's so many options in Fusion, experimenting is a great way to learn and just get comfortable with the tools. Noel has posted in the chat the advanced guide, which is in a couple weeks. So that will be after the 3 days this week. That's another 2 days, February 24th, 25th, that goes further into Fusion, VFX, a few more lessons from the book later in the book, if you want to keep learning, or if you've done the certification course in the past and you want to brush up, that's there. So that is a different Zoom registration link than this week. So if you want to take that, go ahead and do that. So let's dive in to a couple things that are good to know. We'll review and we'll get into some new things. There's a graphic in the DaVinci Resolve manual that I think is pretty cool and helpful. It may look confusing at first, but I want to talk about where Fusion happens in the image processing pipeline in DaVinci Resolve. So we talked about, opening up some footage. So I've got a piece of footage here in DaVinci Resolve. If I open it up in Fusion, we talked about if I do something in here, like adding a blur to it, that I've got my media in, that's my footage. It goes to the blur, and then it goes into the media out. Everything that goes into the media out goes back to the edit page. So I can see that blur that is now showing up on the edit page. Now, if I switch over to the color page and I just make this whole thing rather blue, go back to the edit page, you can see I'm still seeing the blue, fantastic looking grade that I did. But if I go back to Fusion, and I'm getting into Fusion by having my playhead over this clip, hitting Shift 5, you can also uh, choose Fusion in the lower bar here and open that up, you can see that my image is not blue. The reason that's happening is because everything in Fusion is processed before the color page effects and other effects. So the idea is that VFX are generally done on the image in its original state before it is then processed by color grading or titles or other effects, things like that. So here's a little graphic. Let me go back to this page. This is from the DaVinci Resolve manual. Let me make that bigger. So you can look for its page. Ooh, I don't remember the page number. Maybe one of the panelists can find it, but in the latest version, it's several thousand pages in there, and you can look for order of image order of image processing, something like that. Just search for source processing, timeline processing, any of that. But this is a flowchart. Let me get my mouse app going. There we go. Now I can draw. So here I have Fusion page compositing. This is what we're talking about here. Fusion is processed here. And you can see it goes from the top down, and then there's arrows of where things happen. So we can see that when we're opening up DaVinci Resolve, as we start doing things, my camera raw settings that are in both project settings and color page may be processed. Um, and this guide here, there's cut and edit page features that are the sort of orange-ish, and then the blue are the color page features. But there's color management, there's input LUTs, there's any deinterlacing, superscale, resizing. Fusion page compositing, anything that happens in Fusion is processed fairly early. After Fusion, then we start to see edit sizing, input sizing. So these are things like in the inspector on the edit page. And then these blue ones, like the grade that I did where I turned the clip blue, that's happening here. So that's after Fusion. And then goes on to post-clip grades, speed effects, compositing on the cut or edit page, the timeline level nodes on the color page, and then several other effects that are related to processing output LUTs, output color space, with project level color management. And then finally, data burn-in and any that all goes to deliver page output. So the idea here is that anything you do in Fusion is happening before most effects that you're going to apply in other places in uh, DaVinci Resolve. So if you're ever going back and forth between parts of your workflow, like you're doing a little edit, you're doing a little Fusion, you're going to color, you're going to Fairlight, you will notice a difference sometimes where this clip is blue here in my timeline, but when I open it up again in Fusion, it is not. So if you ever are seeing an image that doesn't match here, you can always, one quick thing is always easy to go and check to see, am I doing anything in the color page? Yes, you can disable that node or turn it off or delete it or anything like that. So it's the order of processing is good to know. Um, I'll reset that. Good to know as you work through your projects. All right. Let me load up our project from yesterday. We can review a little bit about what we did. If you are not, if your interface looks very different from mine, it may be your screen resolution is different, and you could always try to get back to the default in Resolve by going to Workspace and choosing, where is it? Reset UI layout, right there. So when I click that, it changes the size of my timeline and windows and things like that. So this is the default, and it gets back to that. I'm going to close some of these panels just so we have a little more room. So closing my media pool, I only need to see the one viewer. Timeline doesn't need to be too big, but here's what we did yesterday. We added this clip over here. We can see that there's a Fusion composition applied to this because it has the stars on it. And if I open it up in Fusion, and I do that either by clicking on Fusion down here or by using the keyboard shortcut Shift and the number 5, or right-clicking on a clip and choosing Open in Fusion Page. All of those things work. And we've got our original clip here in Fusion. I've added it to my viewer here by hitting 1 on my keyboard after selecting this node. We added this CG plate, this CG element, drive dock, and then we have cut it out with the hand roto. So this is our basic compositing here. We have some footage, we have another element, and then we are limiting it with a mask in this case. So the mask is just some transparency so we can cut out the guy's hands. We've used some other nodes like color corrector to affect this element, we've used a Luma keyer to identify pixels based on their brightness value. We blurred it a little. We did a color corrector where we also limited that effect with the output of the Luma keyer. And we added a vignette here just to kind of round it out. And then we also touched on keyframing. So keyframes, we took a look at changing this over time. So we're moving around a lot of different features here in Fusion that we're touching, and we'll go over some of those same principles and tools, as well as adding on some new ones today. And just as a reminder, there are no recordings of these presentations. That is part of the deal of Blackmagic offering these for free, is that it's just here, it's live, it's for us to hang out and have a good time together while we're here on Zoom. If you do want to follow along later or review or anything like that, you have access to the PDF guide, which covers a lot of this material, as well as other videos and resources that are linked on the Blackmagic Design training page. And I'll just put that link in the chat. You can go there, and then of course the actual link to the book and the downloads for the training materials are linked above in the chat. All right. Let's do a few preferences while we're still on this shot that I think are good to add just as you are starting to get comfortable in Fusion. So working with Fusion is there's a lot to it. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it here. Like there's a lot to this program. Uh, and there's a lot of preferences and there's a lot of things you can do and a lot of things that you can change. And some of it may be confusing at first. And you know, Fusion is basically a spaceship. It's not quite riding a bicycle. There's not just a pedal and handlebars. There's a lot of buttons. There's a lot of tools. There's a lot of things you can do. And I say that not to overwhelm you, but just so you know, it is a deep uh, topic to dive into. So I hope to give you, empower you with these preferences and not to overwhelm you with information, but rather as you go through and practice on your own and start to do your projects and develop uh, your own skills and workflows in Fusion, is that you have options so that it's comfortable for you. There's a lot you can do for preferences. For example, yesterday we talked about showing or hiding the thumbnails here in some of these. So either right-clicking just on a single node and doing show and show tile picture, or the preferences of showing all of the source files. So right-click here, force source tile pictures. So if I turn that off, my source, my media ins basically no longer have that. I can add that back. Force source tile pictures. One preference that I haven't added yet, which I do for absolutely everything I tend to work on, is lining up the tools to grid. So by default, you can see there's these lines in Fusion in the node area, and it's not just there for show. I can actually use that to keep things organized. So I'm going to right click here, and first thing is I can click line up. Oops, there we go. Right click in the node area, line up all tools to grid. So if I click that, you can see all of my nodes just snapped to the intersections of the grid here. So now uh, it was lined up. I can move these around and I'll do that again. Right click, arrange, or sorry, line up all tools to grid. I click that, it snaps in place. Now I want to continue to have that behavior even if I do move things around. So I can right click again here. I've got arrange tools to grid. Right click in the node area, arrange tools to grid. And now as I move things around, it my only option is to have it snap to a grid. So I can't place this absolutely anywhere I want. It will always snap to the grid, which I really like. It's up to you whether you use that or not, but as you deal with a bigger comp, a more complex shot, and you have a lot of elements, I really like it when things are snapped to the grid and I can line things up and I keep everything organized. That one's not doing anything, but it's there. So as things start to get more complex, it's organized, everything's going in at an angle that looks good to me. And this is, this does not affect your image. So the quality of my VFX work is not directly impacted by where the nodes are. I can, you see the image, if I have that final output in there, it doesn't actually matter where these nodes are placed. If you think about, layers in your timeline, it does matter where those are because in the timeline things are stacked. If it's above, then it's above. But this is a flow chart, not not layers. So the only thing that matters is these connections and what's going into what. But as you can see, I have created myself a bowl of spaghetti. I can't tell what is happening, even though the image processing, you know, is doing the thing that I want. Nothing has changed there. Suddenly, it's really hard to read what I've done. And if you are working on a project for an hour and you get it done and it looks like this and then you're done, that's fine. But if you're coming back to a shot that's complex, and you come back after 2 weeks and you open it up and you see this, you're going to say to yourself, Self, what did I do? So this is not the main idea in the book of keeping organized, but I would like to encourage you to, as you start learning, developing habits of organizing your node tree in such a way that you can understand what you've done. So that feels better. I can breathe easier. It makes me happy. I'm not saying that my desk is organized or that I clean my room as often as I should, but my nodes, that is, I'm much more organized about nodes. See, Charles, your question here, is it fair to say that nodes in Fusion are different from nodes in Color? Yes. Yes, they are. So we talked about it a little yesterday, but I think it's worth repeating because nodes, at the highest level, a node is just a flow chart. It's a thing, and then it has an input and an output, and it goes into another thing. So these are just connections between points, or connections between tools. So there is a lot in common in that, you can have in color, for example, you can have uh, a node, and then you can have another node, and then you have, I mean, another node, and things go like that sequentially. And you technically don't need, you can just have a single pipe of nodes for some operations. But on the color page, every node, let's just go back to the color page and go over that again. On the color page, everything, let's close some things here just so we have more room. Everything we're seeing here, every node that I add is blank. It is just an empty container that says this is a node, it's empty. I can add anything to it. So I can add a gain adjustment to it, and I can go over here and I can add a color warper adjustment. So these nodes, they're just containers. In Fusion, each node is not blank. Each node is a tool. So you cannot add a, uh, this Luma keyer is only a Luma keyer. I cannot add a contrast adjustment to it. This color corrector, however, is for color correction. So I can add a contrast adjustment within there. So in this is also one of the challenges working between Fusion and Color is Color, you add a node, it's a new part of your process, and then you can go and pick the tool you want just by going around the interface. In Fusion, you tend to need to know what you want to add. So I can't just go, if I wanted to color grade this background plate, I can't just add a blank node and there is no blank node. Not quite. So I need to know that I want to add a color corrector. So the good thing about having the shift space select tool thing, which is how I add my nodes, is that everything is searchable by name. So even if you don't know the exact one you're looking for, I can get a clue just by typing in something like what I'm after. So if I know I want to color correct that piece of footage, I can type in color and I have a bunch of options. And the one in this case that I'm looking for is color corrector. That's the first one that comes up, but there are other options. So as you practice on your own and explore and are working on shots, you can always just add something else and see what it does. So in this case, color corrector, it's added this. And if I do a little adjustment, I'm not seeing a difference. Anyone remember why? Has to do with my viewer. All right, I'll give you the answer. So we talked yesterday that yes, Eric's got it, Andrew's got it. So the like on the color page and pretty much everywhere else in Resolve, we see our output. Like the everything is implicit that we're seeing the output of anything we're doing. In Fusion, the viewer is completely flexible. So I'm only seeing what I tell Fusion to see. In this case, I've got my viewer set up here. So this background plate is in viewer number one, but so I'm not seeing the output of color corrector that I've added. So in order to see that, I need to click on color corrector and then I can add it to my viewer by, in this case, hitting 1 on my keyboard. And now I can see the absolutely wonderful grade that I have done. It looks so good. And as you're working in Fusion, you can reset just about anything you do to reset overall everything that's happening in this node. I have this reset button that is here, and I can click on that and it resets everything in this node. If I click on my merge, you can see I have that same icon here. Same with Luma Keyer, for example, there is this reset icon. So if at any point you need to reset what you've done only in that node, that's a good tool to use. Yeah, and Matt's got a good point in the chat here. Because there are no scopes and vector scopes, it might make better sense to do the color work in color. There technically are some scopes that you can put up in Fusion, but the idea is that you're not doing color grading work in the same way that you would on the color page. Um, it's a good point that there are some crossover operations that you can do between the pages here, but the idea is that this is a compositor. So if I have my drive dock and I've composited it with my background plate, I'm not doing necessarily a full grade over my full image, but I am using this color corrector to make the elements match. So if I turn off this color corrector, you can see that the color of just this element changes, getting it to match. So that is something that technically I could do on the color page, but I would need a mask. I would need to make sure that I'm isolating it to just that. The color page is designed for overall color grading of an overall image. Yes, you can isolate. Yes, you can import masks or mats to isolate what you're doing, but it is not designed to give you as much control over individual elements, especially when you're putting them together here in the Fusion page. Now, here's another little tip that is not covered in the book, but I think is very relevant for a lot of workflows um, as we go. I don't think we'll come back to this, but I want to just put this in your brain for what your work is. Um, Color management. We said we'd touch on it a little bit, and this is one piece of color management. We talked about how Fusion works on the original state of an image. So this clip, we are compositing. It's just kind of as is currently and putting it together. If we're doing a color grade on the color page, that's not going to show up here, but sometimes we want to preview what a either color grade or color management is going to look like in the viewer without affecting what happens on the color page. So if I wanted to view this, if I wanted to change the color space of this image, on the color page, you can use, we've got our project level color management. There's a whole separate workshop on that, um, which I highly recommend because I'm teaching it. But no, color management is an incredibly important part of post-production. It's one of those absolute game changer skills and problem solving skills that I think is incredibly important and solves a lot of problems. Um, Hopefully, one of the panelists can put the link to that in the chat as well. Otherwise, we can post it later on. But the idea here is that you're changing the state of your image to match your display and keeping in mind how it was originally shot and how it's supposed to be viewed. This particular clip is technically shot on it was the first Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, so the very old one, not the 4K, not it's the one that was actually pocket sized from many years ago. Um, and so this is a Blackmagic log clip. It looks a little desaturated, but it is still viewable enough that we can do our compositing here. But if you want to look at what an image is supposed to look like, we have a few options for color managing. Let me go one way about it. If you've done the color training before, you may know that we have an effect in Resolve called Color Space Transform. So I can actually access that in a node here. So I've hit Shift Space. I can type Color Space Transform. There it is. Let me add that. And I'm going to select it, hit 1 on my viewer. So I'm seeing the output of everything that comes before it. Now, if I go to my inspector, I've got my controls here. So this clip is input color space of Blackmagic Design Film Gen 1. That's not what the current cameras do. This is what this clip is in. The input gamma is Blackmagic Design Film, the first one. Output color space, for now, will do what my monitor is. So this is Rec 709. And gamma, I mean, I'm on a screen right now that has gamma 2.2, so I'm just going to do that. So let me toggle this on and off so you can see what we've done. So after, before, after. I am hitting Command P on my keyboard to toggle on and off this node. P for pass through. You can also, in the inspector, do this. And you don't have to be following along with what I'm doing right now. This is mostly for a demonstration for your understanding of the workflow. I would rather you just kind of absorb the info and just remember that it's a thing. um, so this color space transform is changing the state of my image from a Blackmagic Design film log state into a display state. Normally in VFX, you are color managing your viewer so that you see something in its intended color space, but you're not affecting the image. the image output so that the when it goes back to the colorist, they can do their own color management. But this is an option for changing the state of my image. But we can also see that I have got this after my nodes and it's before the media out, which means that when I go back to the edit page, if I go to the color page as well, we can see the results of that are in my viewer here. The colorist doesn't want me to color manage in that way most of the time. You probably don't want to have that final output of going into a display space within Fusion. So I can do a couple things. I can move that color space transform after my media out. So yes, you can see that the media out has an output. Why would I do that? Well, I can do things after my media out. So I've got my media out going into the color space transform. Now if I view that, I can see my image in this state. But if I go back to the edit page or the color page, because it's happening after the media out, it's not showing up at here. So whatever goes into the media out shows up on the edit and color pages. Anything that happens after the media out is just for me. It's my own private node. Now, I also don't need to do that in nodes. This is the real thing I wanted to talk about is you can color manage your viewer. So it doesn't happen in nodes. It doesn't go out into the media out. It's just affecting the state of my viewer. So I'm going to reset my viewers by hitting the tilde key, that is the button above your tab key on your keyboard. Now hit media out, hit number one, and I see my viewer. And we talked a little bit about viewer controls yesterday, and we talked about viewing different channels here, but we have other buttons here too. So there's this second one, this tic-tac-toe grid here. If I hover over it, it says LUT. So this is a viewer LUT or any kind of transform that's happening that is only affecting my viewer. So I can click that button to turn something on. Nothing has happened because there's a drop down next to it that allows me to select a bunch of stuff. And there's a lot here. But I would like to call your attention to one in particular, and this is new in DaVinci Resolve 19, or was new in the release of Resolve 19. If you have a older version, you won't see this, but color space transform. There is this color space transform option here, which gives me the same options as the node we were using of color space transform, but it's only applying to my viewer. So if I select color space transform, and then I go back up to this drop down and hit edit, I have these options. So let me do the same thing. Blackmagic Design, Blackmagic Design Film going into Rec 709, for now Gamma 2.2. And you can see that I've now transformed the color space of my image so it looks different than it did before. And I can toggle that. You can see that this LUT icon is a brighter white, so I can turn it off and turn it on. And that is happening just in my viewer. So now if I go back to the edit page, you can see the image no longer looks like that. I'm not sending that color space transform out into a media out. It's only happening on my viewer. And in fact, it's only happening on one of my viewers. So media out, I'm showing, let me zero it out again. So I'm clicking on media out and I'm clicking 1 on my keyboard and I'm clicking 2 on my keyboard. So I've set the same signal into each viewer and you can see that they look different. The reason is that I have only done my color space transform viewing LUT on viewer number 1. So these are independent. These settings are independent. That's useful because sometimes I'm working on an alpha channel in one and then I'm viewing my final output in another, and I don't need both of them to be color managed or affected in some way. So if I wanted the same settings here, I would have to go to color space transform, edit, and then I have those settings here. And there are other settings too. I won't go over those today, but you can basically anything that's in your DaVinci Resolve LUT folder will show up here. So you have a lot of options of other LUTs that are in Resolve to use. There are plenty of other items in here that let you transform the viewer in a number of ways. So if you are experienced in VFX and you have used OCIO before, um, that is there. So that's useful for color managing your viewer, similar to what you might expect in Blender or Nuke or a number of other apps. And if you don't know what those are, uh, that's okay, because we won't be using it again this week. I did see in the chat resetting the viewer. This I use this all the time. It's the tilde key above the tab key. So you can see that I have both of my viewers active right now. The two white dots are under this media out showing me that this node is active in two viewers. So I hit the tilde key that's above the tab key on my keyboard. I hit that and it resets everything so there's nothing going out to the viewers. I do this a lot of the time so that I'm absolutely positive which node I'm sending into the viewer. Because sometimes, like we talked about before, I might be viewing something in here and I start adjusting my color corrector and nothing's happening. And of course, the reason is that I'm viewing this node, I'm viewing this node right here. I'm not viewing that node. So because I know that, I can just click on it and hit one on my keyboard, or I can just reset everything with a tilde key. And now that I know I'm not saying anything, I can make sure absolutely positively that I'm clicking on the one I want and putting that into my viewer. And if you are in another country with a different style of keyboard that's not a US QWERTY keyboard, I don't know what your option is for that. But for me, it's the tilde key. So yes, that is a couple color management options for making sure you are controlling the state of your image just for the viewers. As you go through your projects, if you have log footage that you're bringing in and you're working on it in Fusion, that's a useful tool to have. It's not something we're really going to be working with much for the rest of our lessons, only because the lessons in the book are designed to really get the basic principles of putting some uh, pieces of footage together, basic compositing, we're tracking, we'll be keying, things like that. And we're not worried too much about color management, but as color management workflows become more common, I want to make sure you have uh, at least a basic understanding of how to affect the state of your viewer so that you can do that if you need. All right, let's start adding some new footage into the mix. Oh, and I think we will do. I didn't say this at the beginning, but we did take a break yesterday. I think we may take two short breaks today, since we have two lessons and a lot more to cover. So let's say our first break will be soon. Um, let's give it another 15 minutes and we'll do a 10-minute break and then we'll work for through our lesson and then we will take another 10-minute break or so after another hour. So that way we split split this up into a few pieces, and we're making sure that our brains are not overloading with nodes. Looks like people are following along in the chat. Great. Jason's here. Hey, Jason. Uh, Jason, post a link to your YouTube channel. We have some smart people in here. Like Noel's a great trainer. Chris is a great trainer. Jason's got a fantastic YouTube channel on mostly audio things. And I don't know as much about audio. When I want to learn audio, I go to Jason, as well as Mary, who teaches the Blackmagic Design Fairlight certification course, which you should also sign up for. It's very detailed. Okay, here we go. I'm going to my project manager by hitting Shift 1 on my keyboard, or you can hit the home button down here in the lower right. And we're going to do the process we did yesterday to add a DRA, a .dra DaVinci Resolve archive. So I'm going to, in my project manager here, right click, restore project archive. That is because we have a DRA file to import. We're not doing import project. You must select restore project archive for this to work properly. So I'm going to click that. The folder that I want has come up. If it didn't, navigate to it. And we've got Fusion 18. This is in the download files. Same download that you downloaded yesterday if you were here. So there is the one that ends in part 1. Fusion 18 lessons part 1.dra. Don't click into media files. Don't click on project.drp. You want to have this DRA folder selected. Hit open and the project will import. And there we go. Fusion 18 lessons part 1. It's got some robots as the main image. I don't think we're going to be meeting those robots this week, but that's another shot you can look at that is in the book. I will double click, and here we are in the project. And if things look different than how they do on your screen, I'm going to select workspace and reset UI layout. So now we're all on the same page as far as how things look. But again, I always customize my interface so I only see what I need to see. Uh, but let's do a quick tour of the project while we're here. We're not going through all of the shots that are in here because this is for the entire or most of the Fusion book. So there's a lot of shots and a lot of media, and we'll just be covering a few lessons. But if you are working through the whole book on your own later, there are a number of timelines here. There are completed timelines, so you can see how things look at the end. There's the media for all of the various projects, and a lot of that media is organized into folders here. But for now, I can close my media pool. I can only view this viewer by clicking on my viewer icon in the upper right. And I'm going to hit Shift Z while my timeline is selected. So now these shots take up the full zoom of the timeline. You can also adjust your timeline zoom by here, but I tend to toggle Shift Z so it goes to seeing the full extent. We're going to be covering two shots today. So there's this one where our goal is to replace the sky. It's just bright white, gray, overcast. The director wants some clouds in there and some rainbows. And there is this shot underneath it on the timeline. Right here, there's this sky with rainbow image. And we're going to take a piece of it and put it into our image. And then later, we're going to also take a look at this van shot and add a logo to the side of it so that it fits the story of the project. But first thing is this foreground and background with replacing a sky. We've got a couple principles to go over of how we'll be doing this shot. So we have mostly keying, which we talked about yesterday. We did that with a Luma key for the backpack. Keying is the process of identifying pixels based on their value. That's just it. It's just selecting certain pixels in an image based on something. In the case of a Luma key, we're selecting a certain amount of pixels based on how bright they are. When we get to chroma keying, that is selecting chroma keying is selecting pixels based on their color values. So that is why green screens are common, is that you can easily identify what's green and then affect it, remove it, create a matte using it so that you can replace the green but keep our subject. Here, we are keying by identifying the bright parts of a sky, removing that, and then replacing it with, in this case, our sky. So this is going to be lesson 3 of the book, if you are following along in the PDF. We're going to do a couple things here. We're going to go by the book, the way that the book explains it, which I think covers a lot of features in Fusion that are great to know. And I'm also going to do more options. This is not to overwhelm you, but rather to show you that there's many different ways to do similar things, but also get you in the mindset of problem solving. VFX compositing is just visual problem solving. The and I don't mean like a bad problem, I just mean, a challenge, a puzzle to solve. So in this case, our challenge is, hey, we have this sky, this area that we want to change. We also have subjects that are moving around. We also have a camera that is actually slightly moving around. So how do we stick a sky to our area, to our shot, as well as making these bits transparent without making these bits transparent or that bit transparent, because then it won't look realistic. So these are just problems to solve, and Fusion is a great way to do that. But there are many ways to do it, and we'll approach it in with a number of different tools in a couple of different ways. Um, I think the takeaway here is that there's not one right way to do things. There are some longer way to do things. There's some less repeatable way to do things. There are faster ways to do things. There are more or less effective, but there's nothing that's ultimately wrong. Uh, so as you did the previous shot that we worked on, there are other ways to do that. Anything that we do today, there are other ways to do that. You will, as you get familiar with VFX workflows, I think you'll have a better understanding of that. So I don't want to get in your mind as we're going through the book that this is the way you must work. I think it's a good way to do it by the book. Um, and I think you should practice that. And then as you get familiar with it, start to change things. Start to figure out what else you can do to accomplish the same task. Then you can start really diving into just about anything. It's like cooking in that, you may know how to make a great pasta dish by following the recipe that you downloaded from the internet after you skipped the stories and all the things and navigated the ads. Has anyone noticed that recipes on the internet have way too much on them? Like you just want to skip to the recipe. Anyway, so you can follow the recipe and you'll have a good pasta dish. But you also, as you go, you're like, what if I do something different with the vegetables I'm adding? Or I change some things about the sauce, or I add a different sauce. You'll still come up with a good result, but that involves knowing your tools and knowing that there are different ways to do things. So we'll do the same sort of thing as you're cooking in Fusion. Oh, I see we have some skip to the print version of the recipe, no ads. Great. Yes, I heard, well, we'll get off topic. I don't want to do that. Uh, hope I'm not making you hungry just yet. We will have a break soon so you can get a snack. All right, so let's start to do some things by the book here. Now we have our two elements. There's two elements on the timeline currently. So we have, and I'm just hitting D for disable while this clip is selected so I can see the clip that is underneath. So I have my two elements here in my edit page timeline, and I can see both. And I just D for disable to turn off that top one so I see the bottom clip. So let's just identify what we're doing. So I've got a sky. There's also some other stuff down here, so I'll probably want to resize this a little bit so I'm not seeing those. And then I see this shot right here that is my my actors. It's got the background. It's got the sky we're going to remove. Now, my timeline resolution is one thing. I've got, let's see, Shift 9. I see my timeline resolution is 1920 by 1080. Let me look at these graphics here in Sky Replacement, and I can actually see that I've got something a little different going on in that the resolution of my footage is also 1920 by 1080, but this Sky with Rainbow image is a different resolution. 3888 by 2187. So it's bigger than my footage. It is scaled to fit within my timeline, so I'm seeing the whole thing here. If I just remove my sky from my foreground, I'm actually going to start to see a little, I might have elements that I don't want to see in there. So I can do some things to resize it and get the results I want. We're going to go through a couple different ways to deal with that, so you know, and then so feel free to follow along with this, but we're going to undo some things. So let's say, let me disable this top clip just so we can affect the sky for now. I'm going to go to my inspector and I'm going to scale this up. I'm going to type in 1.5 just so I'm zooming in on the part of the sky that I might want to use. I can also move this around just so I don't have any other pieces of, the bottom here. So I'm just moving around the sky in the edit page here just to get mostly sky. Now I can enable this clip again, and I'm only seeing that. Now we talked about yesterday going into Fusion, and that only pulls in one selected clip. So if I go to Fusion right now, you'll see that I only have one clip in here. I only have this clip with the actors in it. If I go back to the edit page, I can disable that and then open Fusion. And now it's actually adding my sky element in here. If I wanted to get both of those into Fusion from what's in the timeline, I can combine these into a Fusion clip. This is similar to a compound clip if you've used that before. But what it does is it combines these into one single clip and then has both of these sources in Fusion. So I'm going to right click and navigate here to New Fusion Clip. And when I click on that, watch what happens in the timeline. Ta-da! So now this says Fusion Clip. I just have one item in here. I've got some stars in there saying that there's something going on in Fusion. Now, if I open this up in Fusion, switch to that page, you can see I've got a few things going on here. I actually have a background node, and the way it tends to stack these is based on how they were in the edit page. So video track 1 is media in 1, and video track 2 is media in 2, and then it has a background in here that's actually merged, or is the background of everything to set the size of my comp, my canvas. So the order of this sort of makes sense in that it's reverse order, but it's also a little confusing visually because that's not how I tend to composite in Fusion. So I might actually rearrange things slightly like this. So I have the background as my canvas or my artboard, if you will, if you're coming from a image, layer-based image sort of thing. Then I've got media in, so that's my sky, and then I have media in 2, which is my actor footage. So background here, and that's the foreground. So now this becomes the background, and then I'm compositing that on top. Now, because I have added these from the timeline into a Fusion clip, it has changed the resolution of my images. So when I add things into a Fusion clip, it's based on the resolution of my timeline. So we remember before that this image, the sky with rainbow, if I go to resolution, that was 3888 by 2187. I can see the resolution of anything in Fusion by just going to the top right of my viewer. So middle mouse button, I'm going to scroll up and I can see right here that the resolution of this image actually now is 1920 by 1080 because it's just the output of what was coming from the edit page. If you remember in my inspector, I changed the image, I zoomed in a bit, and I no longer have access to any of that other information. So if I'm going to add a transform after this node to move it around, and you can see that if I move things around, there's no more parts of that image. I don't have access to the rest of the image. Whatever I cut out on the edit page is now happening, is now showing up here because I made that into a Fusion clip. So it's understanding what is happening in the timeline. So in this case, I might not want that. In fact, I don't want that. If you are dealing with two things that are the same resolution and you're just putting them on top of each other, like a graphic or a title or just two pieces of footage that are exactly the same size, and you don't have anything else to deal with, a Fusion clip is actually a good option. That's why it's a feature in Resolve. It has its uses, but because this is a larger image with a background and we may want to change things around, we can do something different. So I'm going to go back to my edit page. I'm just going to start hitting Command Z until I get back to how things were before. So now I've got my foreground. That's just this clip. And if I hit D to disable it, I can see the background that I've got here. And I don't, as we work through this shot, I don't actually want to be dealing with any resizing from the edit page. I want to do all of that in Fusion just so we can work through that and have full control over it on that page. So I'm going to reset all of these parameters here just by hitting my reset button. Now I'm back to the original. And we're at a good starting place to work on this shot. Okay, let's just get started on this. Before we combined these clips so they both showed up in Fusion. I don't actually need to bring everything from my timeline into Fusion. I can grab things from my media pool. So when I'm working on stuff, I tend to have the footage in the timeline and then bring other elements in. We're going to do the same thing, but we're going to treat this sky with rainbow as our footage. So we're only going to be working on this from the timeline. We can disable the foreground here, and then we'll bring that into Fusion from our media pool. So I've got Sky with Rainbow, I've got this top one, this foreground disabled. I'll click on this, I'll have my playhead over it, and now I can switch into Fusion by hitting Shift 5 on the keyboard or hitting the button down here. And now we're in Fusion. We're only seeing my sky. That's the only thing that's in here. And the other thing we'll notice is as I zoom in, move my view around, and I can see that I'm now working with the full resolution of this image. So even though my timeline is set to 1920 by 1080, Fusion, if you are working with that piece of media directly in Fusion, not with a Fusion clip, not with anything that's combined, you are working with a full resolution of anything you import into here. So that can be helpful for anything like this where we're only going to grab a piece of it and we want control over that within Fusion. Let's grab our other piece of media. So we've got this media in, we go to media pool, go to sky replace here, and let me change this back to my thumbnail view so I can see what these are. So we've got, this is all was already in my timeline. That's what I'm working on now, but I also have this foreground. So let's click and drag and bring that into my node flow. And now I've got that piece of footage. Let's close the media pool. Hit 1 on the keyboard, and now I can see that I have that footage in there as well. Let's rename these nodes so we know what we're working with. Media in 1 and media in 2 don't tell me a lot, so we do have our thumbnails here, and that's helpful, but renaming things is a good habit to get in. So clicking on media in 1, which is my sky, I'm going to type a name that's very creative, sky. So I've got my sky, name sky, media in 2. I'll select that. Let's call this actors because that has my actors in it. And that's a good place to go. Now, we can composite these together. Let's do that and see what happens. So yesterday we talked about the shortcut to merge things together, which was to grab the output of whatever you want in the foreground and to drag that on top of the output of whatever we want to be in the background. And once I do that, I have this merge that's created. Now let me add the output of that merge into viewer 2, and you're going to see something that doesn't look correct. What have we done? You remember that our sky is 388 by 2187. If we go to our actors, you can see that that is 1920 by 1080. So now that I've merged them together, I've put a smaller piece of footage over a much larger element. Now in Fusion, we have access to everything at its full resolution, but the size of effectively the canvas that I'm working with, the size of my composition as I'm working in Fusion is determined by the background of my merge or the background of whatever I've put into my comp. And this is not the look of the shot that I want. So I actually want to be working on an image that is 1920 by 1080 so it matches my footage here. So here's what I'm going to do. Because the footage we were working with on the timeline, our first media in, the sky, that was the default. Fusion is going to default things to being 388 by 2187. Let me delete this merge and we'll just start from scratch. I'm going to add a new background node that will effectively set the working size, canvas size of our composition here. So I'm going to click somewhere in my node area, shift space. I'm going to type in background or BG, which is the abbreviation that you can see right here. So if I type BG, that's the first thing that's selected. I hit enter, and now that background is there. And looking at it, because the footage we were opening up from the timeline is 388 by 2187, that is also the size of this background. That is, in fact, not what I want. But all hope is not lost because I can change that. In my inspector, once background is selected, I can click on image. And now I have some settings here for the resolution of what this background should be set to. And the first thing I want to do is uncheck auto resolution. So it's not going to set the resolution automatically based on the footage I imported. I can now manually select these values. If you don't have auto resolution, or if you have it auto resolution selected, you're going to have trouble changing these. So make sure to uncheck auto resolution. Now I can type in 1920 and 1080. And there we go. This background, you can see, is now 1920 by 1080. Now, if I composite the sky over this background, I should also say it doesn't matter what color this background is because we're not going to see it. This is just setting the the size of my composition here. So if I wanted it to be green or some other color, or that would be fine. It wouldn't actually matter. I wouldn't recommend doing it just because it's not affecting anything. So I'm just going to leave it as is. Now I'm going to take the output of my sky, grab that, and hover over the output of the background one and create a merge. Let me hit tilde key to reset my viewers. And now if I put merge one in viewer one, we can see I have just a piece of my sky. And if I zoom out on the viewer using command and my middle scroll wheel, or control if you're on Windows, I can actually see on my, as long as merge is selected, I can see the bounds of that original sky image. So if I view the sky, I see that. And then if I view the merge, I just see the piece of a sky that corresponds to 1920 by 1080. Now that I've done that, I can change, we can affect the part of the sky we want to see by adding a transform node. So transform, let's type in transform. This is an effect that just allows me to move my plate around. So if I am viewing merge one and I have transform selected, I can just start to move the center X and Y coordinates around. And I can start to see that I'm affecting. Let's make this bigger. I'm affecting what I see on screen. So I can change the center by dragging these parameters here. I can also just click and drag on my viewer. I have these arrows, so I can drag along the Y, the X axis. I click the up and down arrow, drag along the Y axis, or I just hit that part in the center and I can drag this anywhere. I can also adjust the size of this. So if I want to see more of the sky, just take my size down, move that around. Let's get a little more rainbow in there. That's pretty nice. So we've got our sky, we've got that composited over a background, so it's now matching the resolution, 1920 by 1080, of our original footage. And I think I'm going to leave it here just for a moment. Let's see if there's any questions that could use some answering at this point of what we've covered for resolution. I know resolution is a big topic of how Resolve handles things, and I don't want to lose any of you by just thinking about all of the different parameters we're doing to affect that. So panelists, any questions we should answer at this point on that topic or anything we've done so far?
Yes, maybe you can show one more time how to drag the clip from the media pool.
Yeah. So we were on the edit page and we opened up the sky with rainbow on Fusion. So only that was in our composite here. And then from the media pool, I grabbed this foreground clip and just any piece of media, you can click and drag and bring it from your media pool into Fusion, and it shows up here as a media im1. And so that is what I did with this, and then I hit function F2, or just F2 if you're on Windows, and named it actors, and now I have my two clips. Now, if you're dealing with very different clips, that might not line up, but because the length of the clip, the sky clip, in my timeline and the length of this clip in my media pool are the same, things line up and it works out. If the sky was, 2 minutes long in my media, in my timeline, and then this clip was only 5 seconds long, I would have a very different uh, sort of experience doing this because it wouldn't line up, and then if as I played through, it wouldn't show up. But because the length of the sky clip in the timeline and the length of this media that I've composited in are the same. Everything lines up, and I'm good to go. Which is also the importance of managing your media in your timelines or trimming things as necessary so that you're not dealing with realigning things in Fusion. The timeline is really good at aligning clips based on time. That is also one good use case for the Fusion clip that we did early on, where you can just trim things in the timeline as necessary, and both of those things are brought in with the same timing into Fusion. So try to make sure things are aligned before bringing those in so things match up. With the sky, it's just a still image. So if we did it the other way around, where we had the actor clip as from our timeline and then just brought in the still image of the sky, that would work too, because the sky being a still image, we don't have to worry about the timing of that. What else? The resize of the background. I see that in the Q&A here. Yeah. So if I'm clicking on sky, let me just do viewer number one. So if I view my sky, I can see that I'm working with the full resolution of this piece of media, 3888 by 2187. And I want the resolution of my composite to match my footage here. So as we looked at before, whatever the background is, the first input, that sets the size of my composition here. So I created a background. Let me just do this again. Background. Put that in my viewer, and you can see currently it's the same as my first the media that we've grabbed from the timeline. So I can change that by going to, I'm in background. I go to inspector. I click on this second tab here. So the first tab is color, so I can set the color of the background. Doesn't really matter what color it is. I click on image. Now, in these image settings here, I first need to uncheck auto resolution. So it's not doing it automatically. I can now type in 1920 and 1080, and I've manually set the resolution of this background. And now if I pipe that into my background of the merge, and I have a sky on top. Now, if I view my merge, I can see that the image I'm working with, the output of this merge, is 1920 by 1080. If I swap the inputs, that's Command T or Control T, I've immediately changed that. So now the output of this merge is 388 by 2187 because it is responding to whatever the background is. So let me do that Command T or right click on here, swap inputs. So I want the background to be the background input, the yellow input, to be my background that is set to 1920 by 1080. So now my merge and anything that happens after this is 1920 by 1080. Our next steps are going to be adding the actors on top of this background. We're going to identify parts of the sky we want to remove, and we'll do it in a couple different ways as we go. But I think now is a good time to take a break, and I'll answer more questions after that, and then we'll move on to the next pieces of this shot. If you are struggling to follow along with it thus far, it's okay. Some of these are very new concepts to you. Don't fret. You have the PDF as a guide to work with later. I'll answer as many as we can. Ask anything you need in the Q&A for clarification as we go, and we'll get into new things shortly. So let's do a break, and I'm going to give us a fun new break slide. How's that? So it's now break time. Let's actually take 15 minutes, grab a coffee or a snack, and I'll see you in 15. And we're back. Welcome back. Here we go. I've got some noise canceling headphones on now, just in case. Some outside noise going to be happening. I want to make sure I can focus on all the nodes we're doing. Hope everyone had a good break and that you're ready to go with more Fusion. What's next did everyone have? Coffee? Meals? Make yourself some pasta? Since we're talking about that. All right. So I'm in my timeline. Well, let's see. Tea and chocolate, a chocolate croissant, coffee and cake. Excellent. I do like chocolate. Chocolate croissant, great choice. Here we go. Back to Fusion, Shift 5 on my keyboard. Get back where we are. Ooh, Jason, chocolate chip muffin. Excellent. Snack game is good for everyone here. So here's what we've done so far. We've got a background to set our composition to 1920 by 1080. We've got a sky that's started off as 3888, 2187. By putting that on top of our merge, or on top of our background with our merge, we're getting this to be 1920 by 1080. Good. And we've got our actor footage here, which we've not done anything with just yet. But we'll start to connect things as we go. Panelists, anything we should review based on questions before we move along?
No, we have several questions about how resolution works here, but every question is different, so we are addressing all of them.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. resolution, like ultimately Resolve is resolution independent. I can bring in images of absolutely any resolution, and whatever goes into my media out is ultimately going to correspond to my timeline resolution. But I can do work with any resolution in here. The reason the resolution stuff is in the book is because there's a lot of flexibility in Resolve, so I can do all sorts of things here by affecting my resolution, working with things of any size, and then transforming it, or at least merging it over something that is the size of my timeline resolution, so that I'm dealing with um, the same sort of, or the same size, and I can understand how these go together. If you're confused, that is okay. There's a lot to deal with there, and we can also go over other options of how to deal with this for this particular shot, but this should give you a good primer for how to understand these things so you can deal with them if you're dealing with media of various sizes. So we've got some merges going on, and let's just start compositing. So I have my sky that's merged over my background, and now I've got my actors. I want to merge that over here. So I can drag my output of what I want the foreground to be, merge that over what I want the background to be, and here we go. Now, if I view that merge too, you can see I've got that merge done. And let's connect that to my media out just so I have everything connected in the way that will go out to my edit page. So currently, this is just on top. I'm still only seeing that because I haven't isolated this based on my luminance values or anything like that. Now let's play with some of the merge options I have. So previously I've just looked at merge and just used it as a way to glue things together. So foreground goes on top of background. But I do have other ways of processing the image here. So you see this apply mode. I'm in my inspector while merge 2 is selected. And so the applied mode normal is just putting foreground over background. That's it. Just one over the other. Now, if I change that mode, I'm going to use darken for now. And this is changing my apply mode. You can think of this like composite modes or blend modes that other apps have. If I set this to darken, what it's going to do is that it takes the foreground lighter pixels and makes them transparent. So let's see what happens. So I'm actually seeing my sky come through. I'm also seeing it in other areas as well, but you see that the lighter pixels from my foreground have become transparent. So now I'm seeing the background come through. This isn't necessarily the best image to look at some of these other examples, but some of uh, these other apply modes are relevant and may be helpful for other composites you're doing. Screen, for example, is common where it's doing the opposite, where the foreground darker pixels become transparent. This is not what I want here, but just so you can see what it's doing there. Um, I have multiply, which makes it darker, the white pixels transparent, but it's darkening. You see everything here. So these are all just different ways to combine images. It's not just foreground over background, but you're actually having the output respond to the luminance values of the inputs. So for now, I'm going to set this back to darken, which is what I want, which is, at least for the sky, doing a pretty good job of letting the background come through in the areas that I want, and then my edges which is generally the hardest part of a comp like this, are actually pretty good because I have a lot of contrast. You know, these images of the sky, these pixels in the sky are much brighter than these parts right here. So for most of what we've got in here, it does an okay job. But there's more to do. As you can see, we have a lot going on in these parts because we have a lot of bright pixels there. So reflections of the sky and the water, just overall brighter pixels. So let's deal with that. I'm looking at my merge over here. I've set my apply mode in merge to darken. I've got my sky. Let's actually go back to this transform node real fast. And let me make sure the sky is placed where I want. Might change my size slightly here just to make sure I'm getting what I want. And I don't need to worry about what's happening down here if there's some of those pieces of the sky that aren't what I want. I just want to make sure that everything that's happening in the sky area is what I want. I think that's good for now. Feel free to change it to taste. And now I want to do a little bit more to make sure that I'm qualifying only the areas I want so that I am uh, so that I'm only dealing with the sky and not all this stuff over here. So I'm going to create a matte based on luminance values and then refine that so I'm only cutting out the parts of the image that I want to affect with the sky. That's a lot of me talking. Let me just do it and you'll see. And I'll explain as we go. So let's add a Luma Keyer. Our good old handy dandy Luma Keyer that we've used on a previous composite. I'll space things out a little. And one of the great things about working with nodes is that I don't have to move in a linear fashion from here to here to here and only one thing at a time, but I can actually send another output of my, oops, from my actor's footage right here, put that into Luma Keyer, and start working with it to create a matte, to create a key based on the original state of this image. It doesn't have to come out of this merge, but rather I'm working on this Luma Keyer right here. And automatically we can see that something has happened. It's pulling a lot of luminance values and mostly giving me my sky. Now, an easier way to work with the Luma Keyer, just so I know what I'm creating transparent, is working with the alpha channel. So yesterday we talked a little bit about seeing that in our viewer. Let's go to the viewer settings up here. Click on alpha. And now this is the alpha channel is showing me what is going to be transparent. So currently the darker pixels are going to be transparent. The lighter pixels are not. That is actually the opposite of what we want, but I'll get to that. So we just want to make sure we're isolating the sky. Now I can take my sliders here, the ranges here in my inspector, while Luma Keyer selected. I'm going to drag my low threshold. And as I drag, you can see that the dark parts are getting darker. So those are becoming more transparent. I'm going to drag that pretty high so that I take out a lot of this. I've got it to 75. So you can see it's doing a decent job at mostly getting the sky. I still have some white areas here coming through. We'll deal with that. But then because I have some parts that aren't pure white in here, I will drag the high down. And I'll keep dragging that probably to around here. So my current values are 0.75 as the low, 0.8 as the high. So this is a narrow, fairly narrow selection here of crushing things. What I've done is created a lot of contrast in my alpha channel. So I have a pretty decent edge for where the sky is and around the actors. And it's a good start. Obviously, we're not done. We have some holes, but we'll deal with that. One way to deal with these holes is we can blur our mask that we've created, or this alpha channel is a mask. So within the Luma Keyer, I have this blur setting, and that will allow me, let me zoom in a little and see what's going on. If I adjust that, you can see the image starts to get blurry. So I'm taking out some of the hard edges from this and drag that blur, drag it up all the way just so we see you get a pretty blurry image. I don't need it to be that blurry. I want some decently defined edges, but not the hard edges we have here. So let me take that to say 0.5. So we're just blurring it a little bit. We've still got some holes here. If I view the color channels here, I hit C on my keyboard while the viewer is selected to go back to the color viewer, and I can see what's transparent and what's not. So I've got my sky is in a pretty good spot, but I've got the holes here that I can fix. There are multiple ways to address this, and we'll do a different method later. But for now, we have some tools in Fusion here where we can contract or expand the edges of our mask. And we're going to use a new node to do that. Now I have my Luma key selected, and I'm going to type in erode. So I have this erode dilate tool, new node. It's adding after Luma keyer. And let me make sure that that is in my viewer. So I hit 1 on my keyboard, and let me make sure my alpha channel is selected again so I can select the alpha channel in my viewer here, or I can have my viewer selected and press A on my keyboard. A shows me the alpha channel, C shows me the color channels, or I can go to each individual color channel by hitting R for red, G for green, B for blue, C back for color, and again, I want A for alpha. Also, you can see this icon change. So if I'm viewing my color channels, I can see the 3 circles there. For color channel A shows me this circle with a checkerboard pattern on it. That is my alpha channel. Now, erode dilate. What I want to do, so eroding basically changes the borders of my mask here. So eroding and dilating is just shrinking or growing. So let's see how this works. So I've got this one. And if I bring this down, I'm eroding the edges of this. So you can see as I bring this down, if I bring it down very far, see, I'm just getting rid of all of the holes here. And I'm also changing the edges of this. So it's doing quite a lot. If I take it too far, I'm changing the borders a lot. I don't want to do that. What I can actually do is, my goal here is to shrink some of the holes and then grow the mask again to be close to its original state as far as this border, but we'll be closing the holes. So I don't need this to go too far. Let me just drag this down to, let's say, negative 0.005. And it's done a pretty good job, actually, just doing that much. I've taken out a lot of the holes here. Doesn't need to be perfect, but I've got that going here. Now, if I take a look at that versus my original, the row dilate versus Luma key, you can see the edges of my sky is changing quite a lot. It's going to lead to some unwanted borders of my composite. So I'm going to add another erode dilate after this. Make sure I put that in my viewer. And now I can grow the edges again. bring that up to, say, 0.008. So if I go between the Luma Keyer and the Aerodilate 1 and Aerodilate 2, you can see that the edges here have gone back more or less to the original state. I do have some bits poking through here, and that's actually okay for now. I may be able to deal with that in another way later. But for now, what I really care about is this edge being correct. And so I can add a new node. Someone was asking if you can duplicate an effect node. You can actually just copy and paste. So if I undo that, delete that second one, I'm just going to grab this one here. I can hit Command C on my keyboard or Control C if you're on Windows. Click and then Command V or Control V to just paste. And it does the same thing. I'll just need to change the options here. So you can copy and paste nodes just like you would copy and paste text. But for now, I'm going to click on this, add it the normal way, shift space, type erode, add, view it, and set that to what I had before, which was 008. And we've got a mask with a decent edge here. Next, I need to combine this alpha channel with my original footage here. So basically I'm creating a transparent version of this image that will sit on top of everything. So after this node, the Aerodilate 2 node, I will add a new node, a new tool we haven't talked about yet. Matte control. So I typed in matte, I have this matte control, I'm going to click add, and there we go. So a matte control node is, in short, a node that lets me control my matte. Of course. So the idea here is that it has multiple inputs and so I can control this matte to do exactly what I want. There's some tools in here where I can click to combine various channels, various inputs that are going in here. I do have contract expand controls within this. I have blur nodes with blur tools within this. So there's a lot that I can do with it, but we're using separate nodes for now to control this. And what I'd actually like to do is I'm going to disconnect that because I want my Aerodilate to go into the foreground input. That's the green triangle here. And then I'm going to take the actors plate, my footage, and put that into the background. The reason I'm doing that is I want the matte control node to, the effect it will be having is taking the alpha channel from this pipeline right here and then combining that with the alpha channel, which is currently just solid. There is no transparency by default. So I do that by clicking on matte control. I go to combine alpha, and you can see the results in my color viewer. If I click on alpha channel in my viewer, you can see now that is the alpha channel of what's happening here. Now, you notice that looks kind of weird, and that's because I'm creating transparency on my actors. It's the opposite of what I want. So if I go to matte control, I can click invert matte, which does the opposite of what it was doing. Like we talked about yesterday, inverting is a common thing, just so if the black part is what you want to be solid, then you just switch it by using invert and vice versa. So most of the time you will get what you want with a matte or the opposite of what you want, and that's what the invert matte is for. Let's add a merge. So I'm going to merge all of this on top of my existing footage. So I've got this merge here, hold down shift, put that into my pipeline, and I release, and now it is connected. You can also, let me do that again. Merge, I click and hold, drag that over the pipe, and hold shift. So now that color of the pipe is changing, and then I release, and now it is connected. So now I can take the output of this matte control, put it into the foreground, the green triangle of this merge 3. And now if I view that in my viewer, you can see if I switch between merge 2, this one over here, I had all this going on, and then I have merge 3. I at least have my edge back, but now I need one more thing to do so that I'm getting my background to come through. Not able to see matte control on viewer. I have some questions here on what we've done so far. You'll notice that this isn't actually seeing what we want. The reason is there's one more thing I need to do. So I have an alpha channel here, but it's not actually applying to what I did, which is why I'm not seeing the sky coming through. So let me go back to matte control, and I need to check this box right here. This is important. So this tells that alpha channel to apply to the image itself. Right now, I'm adding it as a separate channel by combining alpha, but it's not doing anything to the image itself until I click Post Multiply Image. Now that I've done that, you can see my sky's coming through. I have a pretty good edge. Looks pretty good. At least better than it was. Let me space some of these out so it's a little easier to read. So to recap, we had the actor's plate merging on top of the sky with this merge 2. We used the darken mode so that it takes the dark pixels and keeps those, except that it also applies everywhere in my image. So we want to create a matte so that this part of the image is solid. We did that by doing a luma key to identify the sky. We eroded and dilated so that we have this part as solid. And then in our matte control, we inverted that. So it's actually, instead of identifying the sky, it's saying identify everything except the sky. Then we input the actors into the matte control. So we combine that matte we created with Lumakeer and Aerodilate. We combined those using the combine alpha. So that's taking the alpha channel we created here and combining it with the footage, and then post multiply image so that that is now applied. And that's putting essentially this part with just the actors, taking out the sky, putting that back on top of our plate, back on top of what we had done before. So you can see if I'm on merge 2, I see my sky, but we have some holes, transparency, various parts here. And now if I view merge 3, those get filled in thanks to what we did with the erode dilate. I see, Vicky, you have an important question here. Is there a simpler way to do this? Uh, Shorter answer is maybe. What I mean by that is it depends on the shot you're working on. So for this shot, yes, there is a simpler way to do this. Depending on the shot, it might not be a better way. It depends on the shot. It depends on what's going on in the shot. I will be showing you a different way to approach this shot that I think is simpler, but also isn't going to work for everything. The purpose of doing it this way is one, to show off a lot of tools that Fusion has, because any shot you're working on in VFX is a matter of merging. It's often a matter of creating a key, affecting that key, combining that key you've created with your footage in some way and merging it on top. And to those that said, I feel like merge 2 isn't necessary, I think I saw that on there. Um, they so technically you can do without it, but here's what happens if I turn merge 2 off. Because yes, we are compositing this plate over the top of this again here, but if I turn merge 2 off, watch what happens to my edge. So that's on, that's off, on and off. So technically, no, it isn't necessary, but I'm getting a better edge by doing some compositing here and then also using this key that I created. So I have a better edge around the actors, around the landscape here. And when it's combined, I get a cleaner result of my edge. Everything else is pretty easy to fix if I have problems over here and stuff like that. I can always mask things out. But edges, especially when you're dealing with landscapes or complex features or subjects that are moving around a lot, having a good edge is pretty helpful, and everything else becomes easier. So for other methods, we will cover that in a little bit. Panelists, how are we doing? Most questions covered, or should I recap a little bit more?
No, I think we're doing great. I don't know, what do you think, Cristiano?
Chris loves it. Great.
Yes, it was very different questions from all over the workflow, but I think the way that you just already revealed everything, I think it's good enough if you want to move on, okay?
Okay, cool. Let's see. Let's move into another problem we have in this shot, and then I'm going to start all over again for a different version of this, but I want to do what the book is telling us to do for tracking this shot. I did see a question about camera movement. So if I play through this clip, you can see, I'm just going to hit play. The camera is moving a bit, but my sky is not, which is a pretty good giveaway that the sky is not real. Now, just as far as the color goes, that's one thing we can do. So we could, after the sky, for example, make this match a little bit and add a color corrector. This is after sky into transform. I've added this color corrector, and I can adjust, let's say, maybe the gain. I change my lift, see what happens. I can change the color to be a little more in line with what my original plate has. So already that looks better. Before, after, before, after. So at least it matches a little bit better. I'm not going to call it perfect, but it is better. We're always working incrementally in VFX. So you just can you make it match a little bit better. You can always go back and fix things more later. But that wasn't the problem that I was trying to solve. The thing I need to solve is the fact that the background is not moving, but the features in the shot are. There's some camera movement, so my goal should be to get the sky to move in the same way that the landscape does. So, new principle that we have not yet talked about, tracking. Tracking is the process of keeping track of movement in a shot. So tracking is identifying the position of an object in a frame, and then with that tracking data, we can get other things to move in that way. So in this case, the camera is moving, this landscape is moving in a particular way. So we need to track it, and then we apply that tracking data to the sky. Now, the way that the book does it is to show off some features that I think are pretty cool, and to a point from earlier before, is not the only way to do it, and is not necessarily the simplest way to do it. But I'm going to show it off here, and then I'll show you some other ways to do it. So if you don't want to follow along with this, that's fine. If you do want to try it, that's cool too. I will give you options. But the idea here is that you have an understanding of what the Fusion tools are capable of, and we'll do it this way first, and then we'll look at it in another way shortly. So if you get lost with it, stick with me, just let it absorb, and if it doesn't make sense to you, we'll try something else. So what I want to do here, I've got my merge. So my merge is, we haven't talked about this yet, but so we use transform controls to move an image around. You'll notice that this merge, I also have some transform controls. I can actually just move things around within my merge. A couple reasons for that. One, you don't need a transform. You can just do things within a merge. My preference is normally to do things in separate nodes so that the merge is just merging. In this case, it's just having one go over the other. For merge number 2, I'm just applying a darken, but I could also move things around. I'm going to double click on center to reset that. So I tend to want to just do things node at a time. So this one is just transforming, this one is just merging, but we can use the merge controls or the center transform controls in the merge to link, basically link the position of what this is merging with tracking data. So this is doing everything in one node for the sake of, let's say, visual efficiency and doing things in fewer nodes. And then we will do things, again, I'll give you another option, but we'll do another version after that actually uses more nodes, but I think it's easier. So stick with me. So I've got this merge 1. The job of this merge 1 is to put the sky over the background and get our 1920 by 1080 thing. That's what this merge is doing for now. But now we're going to have it affect the movement of the sky to correspond with the camera movement in my actor's plate. So go to merge, make sure you have this merge selected. Now here's where we get into some submenus and subsections of nodes. So I already said I want to affect my transform controls within the merge. I'm going to right click on center. I have a bunch of options now. So this is the idea. The idea here is modifiers. Most parameters include the ability to have modifiers, that it's other parameters. Basically, it's parameters within parameters. Parameterception, if you will. So this just is a little taste of the depth of Fusion in that things can be connected in much more complex ways. Like I said before, this is not here to scare you. This is just here to show you all of the ins and outs of Fusion that you can choose to use if you want. Here we go. So I've right-clicked on center, and I have this option, modify width. So this is how I add a modifier, and I have a bunch of options here, and I'm going to choose tracker position. So this is going to be adding a modifier that includes a tracker. So already I I can see that something has been added here. I can see a tracker on my screen. Where do I control that? I now have this area in my inspector for this merge modifiers. I click on that, takes me to this new menu, and that has my tracker data in there. Now, what I want to do is affect this so that it's tracking not the merge, not my sky, but it's tracking my actor's plate. So what I can do to do that is, you see there's this tracker source section right here. I just need to have this instead of background 1, which is what it's doing currently, is be actors. In order to get it in there, I can actually click, hold it down, and I drag, and I keep dragging, and I keep dragging until my mouse gets over where it in this box that currently says background 1, and I let go, and now it says actors. So now this tracker is going to use the source from actors. I can also manually type it in there because every name of a node is unique and is, essentially the address of that image. But I like to click and drag and get that in there. So let me undo that. And again, I have this actors node selected, click and hold and drag and keep dragging. And I can't do that because I did not have the correct node selected. Merge, have merge selected, go to modifiers. Now that's there. So I have to click and drag without clicking once first. So I can't have this selected. Merge 1 is selected. Click and hold, drag all the way to tracker source. And now that's actors. And now the tracker is going to be reading the actor node. Now I have a couple options here for tracker type. There's IntelliTrack, which is not what the book uses because that is a new feature in version 19. There's also Studio only. So to make it accessible to everybody, I'm going to select Point instead, which may be the only option you have if you don't have DaVinci Resolve Studio. And Buck, I see your chat there saying there should be a pull down, and it sounds like a good idea unless you're working on a comp that has 500 nodes in it, which happens. If you're working on a big comp, you can have any number of nodes on there. It's actually, at least for VFX, quite common to have pretty big node trees. So click and drag is technically simpler and easier to navigate, or just typing it in. But to your point, it would be cool if we didn't have that much to deal with, but we might. So that's why there's no pull down. All right, so I've got my point tracker selected. I've got this, the actors has the tracker source. I'm currently just on the first frame 0. Now what I need to do is move my tracker to select a point in my comp to track. The idea here is it should be a feature that is steady. That doesn't mean that the camera's not moving, that is not moving in the frame, but it stays stationary. So if I scroll through right here, if I track this actor says nose, it's not a very good thing to track because that's not the motion that I want the sky to follow. The sky should follow the motion of the background. So I don't want to track any of the actors because they're moving around a lot. I don't want to track anything that gets occluded, anything that gets covered up. So if I'm on this frame, let's say right here, and I think, hey, that's a pretty good spot to track right there. But then I scrub through and go, oh no, wait, this guy's face covers it up. I probably don't want to track that. So I can select a point. Now here's what a tracker is doing. So this is the point tracker. That is the default tracker if you're in version 19 and you're adding trackers and you have Resolve Studio, it tends to default to IntelliTrack, which is a bit smarter. But let's go over the point tracker because that is what's covered in the book and what is the default for most VFX tracking uses is that a tracker has a couple pieces. I'll zoom in on this. So there is a pattern box. So the idea with this internal box is that I'm identifying a number of pixels. So for now, I'm going to click. I have this. See if you can see that. In the upper left of that, there's a handle, like a little box on the corner of that box. I can click and drag that to move this pattern around. And you can see over here the pattern I'm identifying as I move this around. So something that has some good contrast, that's a very clear shape, like I can't track the sky, there's nothing there. But if I have this rock feature, that's a pretty clear geometric pattern, easy to identify, that's this pattern area right here. So I'm saying, hey, Fusion, look for that. Look for that set of pixels. And then this larger box around is the search area. So no matter how much the frame moves around, it's always going to look for that pattern within this box. So I can just click on the edges here to make that bigger or smaller. And if my shot is moving around a lot, if there was a lot of camera shake, I might make this pattern search area bigger. But that is also more processor intensive because there's not a lot of movement in this shot. There's just a little bit of moving around. I can keep this a little bit smaller. And so basically the tracker will say, okay, here's the pattern on this frame, go to the next frame. Where is the pattern? Let's search for it within this box. So because I'm on the first frame, I can go here to my tracking tools. I have a couple of different tracking ways to start tracking here. So I can, this one is track reverse. If I hover over it, it tells me that. Hover over this one, track forward, then reverse. And this one says track forward. Because I'm on the very first frame, I only need to track forward because tracking starts here and then it moves on. If I was identifying my pattern here in the very middle, I can use forward then reverse. So it tracks from there on and then it goes back to that frame I was on and then tracks backwards. If I started on the very last frame, I could just go here and track backwards. So you have some options depending on where you are in your timeline. But for now, I'm on frame 0. I'm just going to click track forwards. And you can see the background's glitching a little bit. It's only just because it's trying to process the comp, but the tracker is only referencing my actor's plate, so I don't need to worry about that too much. What it's done is step through every frame and find that pattern. And we can see that it's actually got this path right here, a whole bunch of points that shows me that the path, that feature that I've tracked is moving on. We go to my tracker here. Open that up again, you can see my feature. And what you can do to check the quality of your track is look at this viewer right here and click play. And what that's doing is just looking at the pattern that I tracked, and it's playing only those pixels throughout the entire shot. And when I click play, you can see it's actually, you can almost see a little bit of chatter with noise, but the pattern is not moving, which means that the track was good. If it's jittering a little bit or, totally loses itself, you can know that that track didn't work quite right, in which case you can hit the delete button and start again. But this worked pretty well. So let's take a look at what we've done. We view this merge. I'm viewing my sky. And if I just play through, you can actually see that now the sky's moving around a bit. It's actually following the movement of that track that I just did. So this is because we did a few things in one, just to recap here. So we had this merge. We told the center to connect to a tracker. We told that tracker to follow or to read the actors node and to follow this feature right here. So without having to do anything in multiple nodes, the position of this merge or of the sky within the merge is now moving along. So if we view the out, let's look at our final comp right here. Make this bigger so we can see. And let's just play. And that is actually looking pretty good. The sky is moving along with the background. Our edges are generally clean. Not bad. Could be better, but it's better than it was before. There's always more to fix. But the general idea is here. So let me just go back through that again, because I know it's a lot of steps and the way that it's laid out might not be how you think about it. If you're just saying foreground over background, move the sky. So let me just go through this one more time, what we've done in this version, because it's a lot of steps. So first, we've got a background. And this is also a way just, think programmatically about your nodes. This is a flow chart. So especially when things are laid out in a relatively straightforward fashion, you can sort of start to read what's happening. We tend to work left to right, top to bottom. So background here, that's set to 1920 by 1080. So we have set the size of our comp, the size of our canvas effectively here. We've got a sky that is merged here. We've transformed it to move it around. So it was here, now it's here. We've color corrected it to slightly be closer to what the background plate will do, but we've merged that here. We've got the actors node. We've first merged that using apply mode set to darken, so that we just view that. That is taking the background and removing it by keeping the dark pixels. And that gives us a pretty good edge over here. And, has that sky. And we're refining that by having a better edge for our comp by doing a luma keyer. So we're identifying the sky. We're using erode dilate to remove the holes. And then erode dilate again to move that edge back to where we want it to be. And we're using a matte control to take that alpha channel, invert what we've done. Instead of identify the sky, we identify everything except the sky. Combine that with the alpha channel of our actors plate, and then we merge that on top of everything we've done before. Then we kind of go a little bit backwards. We go back to our merge. The reason we've got this merge on the merge right here, not in a separate transform, is that everything before this merge is still technically 388 by 2187. If we had applied this tracking data to a transform node or something else that happens before there, this track would not work because we used our source on for the track as something that 1920 by 1080. So if we said move 5 pixels to the left on this, the motion would look wrong. But this merge, as we can see, is 1920 by 1080. So it is merging the sky on top, but it still understands that it is the correct resolution for what we're working with, which is why we put it on this merge for now. We right-clicked on center, we modified with a tracker position, and then we got to this modifier here with the tracker. We dragged actors into the tracker source. We chose spot, which is that spot right there, because I scrub through this clip, we can see that it's never covered up by our actors that are moving around a lot in frame. So that modifier, we tracked forward. We made sure that things looked good by looking at that right here, our tracker we played through, and we see that pattern stay steady. And that's good. That works. What if we don't have a spot that is there the whole time? Are we out of luck? Are we out to sea? No, we're still unsure. Just like these actors here. So let's do another version of this tracker, this method. And I'm going to reset everything. And that has taken out our tracker. So we've got this merge. Let's do what we did before. I'm making this easier on myself by having actors in my viewer so I can look at it, but merge one is selected. If you want, you can also view merge one in viewer number 1 and view actors in viewer number 2, just so you can have one selected and then the other one is available for viewer when we are selecting our tracking information. Up to you. So I've got my merge one. I've got center position. I'm going to right click. We're going to modify with a tracker position. I go to modifiers. And now the tracker source here. Need to make sure that I put actors in there. Let's do that. Actors. So now I've got my tracker that's over the clip. And you can see there's also a tracker here because I'm viewing the merge. Obviously, I can't move this tracker around because I'm not viewing what I'm tracking. So that's why I may have this open in another viewer here. And tracker type, I'm going to set that to point so that it's accessible to everyone, regardless of which version you're using. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on here, and let's track a different point. So I'm going to set this point right here. You can see in my tracker there, I've got this shape. Maybe make this smaller. That's a pretty good, probably decently identifiable geometric shape there. I can make this search area, size it however I want. Doesn't need to be too big. But now let's see what happens if I'm tracking this area. I'm on the first frame. Let's zoom out again. And I'll click track forward. Oh, saw a jump. Now, you can see on the tracker here, before we got a pretty nice grouping, kind of like this over here, but now we have something that jumped quite a bit. Let's zoom out and see what's going on. So we were tracking this point, this feature right here. And it did okay for a little bit. And I'll keep scrubbing through. That tracker looks like it's staying steady, but that guy's head is almost in the way. He moves away, and then he comes back, and he covers that tracking point. So as of frame 93, we're okay. Frame 94, the tracker jumps, and now our track's not good anymore. And he comes in front of it again, and it's totally in the wrong spot. So that's not great, but we have a fix. So I've got my tracker. Let me go to frame where we're doing okay. Let's say frame 92. We're still in a good spot. Tracker is still working. Now, because I have plenty of good track here, all I need to do is just track forward in a different way. I don't need to retrack. I can just tell the tracker here in Fusion, hey, use a different point and assume that it moves the same way that our first point did. So now that this point is getting covered up, all I need to do is go to path center right here. And currently it's set to pattern center. So it's tracking center of our pattern while we're tracking. That's the default. That's what we should use most of the time when we have a feature that is in frame moving the way we want the whole time. But if something gets covered up, we can offset this position with track center append. So this is a different mode, and now we can move things around and track another point. So I've selected track center append. And now let me move this tracker. And let me move it to another point. And we can use that point that we did before. We can somewhat safely assume that it moves around in the same way as this point because it's connected to the same rock formation. Just pretend that that point wasn't available at the earlier part of the shot. So now that I've done that, track center append, I've moved my tracker there. Now I can click track forward. Again, it's going to overwrite the keyframes that didn't work so well. Click track forward. And now it's going to move the tracker, this tracking point, in the way that this point, the second point, moves. So let's inspect what we've got. Clear my trackers, move media out in there. And if I did a good job, the background should move the way we want, all the way up to the point where the tracker messed up with this area, and then continue based on the tracking data of this point. It looks like it did okay. So again, if you have a point, a point that is in frame the whole time and stay steady, you can use that as your tracking point. And if you need to change the point because it gets occluded or covered up by something else in shot, or it leaves frame, for example, that is another common reason to change that, is you can. So you start on path center, pattern center, that is the default, and then you go to the point just before the tracker gets off, and change to track center append. And now it will use that new point moving forward. Okay, that's a lot of tracking. How's everyone doing? Any questions, panelists? Anything to recap before we do something else?
Well, we have a lot of questions about tracking, but I think that we have addressed all of them.
Cool. Let's see. You've answered 156 questions so far. Amazing.
Oh, yes, there was a recurrent question that was a lot of people couldn't find the IntelliTrack and couldn't choose between point and IntelliTrack. I don't know if you can explain that again.
Yeah, so IntelliTrack is a DaVinci Resolve Studio version only tool. So that is the paid version only. So if you have the free version, just DaVinci Resolve, you won't have IntelliTrack because that is a neural engine assisted tool. Any of these neural engine things where DaVinci Resolve is trying to be smart and help you track things is not available. The point tracker is available, so you may not have that option if you're in the free version, or if you are in a version 18 or earlier. So the IntelliTrack was new in DaVinci Resolve 19 and is studio only. The IntelliTrack tool, I don't think we're really going to be covering it, but I might as well show it off because it's kind of cool. I'm going to add a new node that is just a standalone tracker. We'll get to explaining this node in more detail in a bit, but what that does by default for me, because I have Studio, it has IntelliTrack as the default thing, and let's give it something harder to track. So what this does, rather than tracking a pattern, is it tries to look for more context clues of understanding what something is and where it might be. So let's put it on our actress's nose and see what that does. So this is just a point that I'm putting here. And if you recall, she moves around quite a bit. So let's see how this track works. And you see, that was not a clear pattern because her head is turning a little bit and she's moving around. But you see that worked pretty quickly. If I play through here, she's changing perspective, but it understands that that is a tip of a nose and it's keeping that point on her nose in focus. So you can see, it's a little hard to see the controls on here, but you can sort of see as I scrub through that tracking point right here stays consistent no matter where she is in frame. So it's pretty great for more complex tracks, or for tracking things faster, or for tracking many different objects. I can have a bunch of different trackers in here and track objects, and then I can use that data to have a background move along with it. I can, I could put a dot and put composite it to the edge of her nose, and that dot will stay there. I could put a fly on there. I could put I don't know, fire. I could set her nose on fire if I wanted to and just have that fire element be on the edge of her nose. That's actually something really great for things that move around a lot. And it's just like a single point. So something worth exploring. We're not really going to get into it too much or at all, I think, in the rest of the lessons this week, but I think it is something we may touch more on in the advanced course in a couple weeks, just because tracking is a big part of VFX. It's a big part of compositing. So putting pieces together and making sure that they match, whether that's movement, whether that's color, whether it's multiple pieces together, tracking plays a big piece in that. And Noel just posted the link to that. So feel free to sign up if you want to keep diving into these tools and Fusion stuff. While we're here, let's give a quick hand to our panelists. They've answered 158 questions so far and posted a lot in the chat with helpful things and probably more responses here. So
Yeah. You
thanks,
wanna?
guys. You're doing great.
No, don't worry. Come on. There's a lot of here different from different moments because this exercise is very, very long,
Yeah.
involving. So there are questions about refining the math. Another one from tracking. So I was wondering if you mind just reading really fast all the 7 questions that we have here, and if there's something that you think that is easier for you to show it, it's better for me, and then we can work on the remaining ones, okay?
Okay. Yeah. Let's see.
Just take a look and
Try.
see if something that is very fast for you to show.
Yeah. I need a review of how to clean up the alpha matte using the matte control node. Let's talk about that. So mattes, controlling your matte is just a big part of VFX. Like most compositing, or not most, well, yeah, most. You're dealing with mattes. A matte is just identifying a parts of an image, and you use that matte to then affect a part of the image. So this is even just day one where we put the circle over our background and we created a matte and had a circle. And it gets more complex from there. So let's talk about controlling our matte. So we've got, in this case, let me explain what we've done here just to review that, and we can get a little more theoretical if that helps. So I'm going to look here at what I've done. I've got an alpha channel. So I have a Luma keyer, and what I've done here, again, this is alpha channel in my viewer settings, or hitting A on the keyboard to see my alpha channel. An alpha channel this is the matte that I'm creating. It's black and white pixels, just saying black is transparent, white is opaque. If you think about it mathematically, if it helps, if you multiply something by 0, which is black, then it goes away. If you multiply something by 1, which is white, then it stays. Or you can think about black being dark, no light gets through, white, light does get through. So I've created an alpha channel. I've created a area of transparency and opacity with this Luma keyer, just saying, here are the light parts, here are the dark parts. And then I'm affecting that with erode and dilate to close some holes, and then to bring back the edges of the matte to where I want them to be. And all of that is going into my matte control. So the matte control node currently it's got my original actor plate going into it as the background, and this alpha channel going into it as the foreground. Now, if I look at my actor plate, I'm still viewing my alpha channel. This technically does have an alpha channel. It's just solid white, meaning there's no parts of it that are transparent. So if I go back to the color channels here, I see this is just a solid RGB image. And then 1 second. Can you hold on for 1 second? So sorry. I had to reset some things. Okay. I'm still here. Don't worry. Okay. Where was I? Matte control. Okay, so I've got a solid alpha matte here. So this is, or not matte, alpha channel. White is opaque, so everything shows up. And what I'm doing is, with the matte control, I'm taking the alpha channel from the output of this erode dilate, and I'm feeding that into my matte control. Now, by default, it said none. This was inverted. So currently, if we're just looking at the alpha channel, I've got background going in here, foreground going in here. Nothing's happening right now because it's just showing me the background. That was solid. Now, what I want to do is combine these. So I'm combining alpha. So I'm saying combine the background alpha channel with the foreground alpha channel. And once I do that, you can see that it's using the alpha channel from what I've created here. Now, what that's telling me is all of this should show through. This is opaque. This is transparent. That's the opposite of what I want. So I'm going to click invert matte. So now it just changes it to be the opposite. So now this is solid. This is transparent. And if I view that in my viewer with the color channels, before it actually looks like this. Now, that's because I'm viewing my color channels right here. If I view the alpha channel, technically that's correct, but I'm not seeing any transparent pixels here. There's no checkered background. The reason is because I don't have the color pixels affected by my alpha channel. And that is addressed by this checkbox here, post multiply image, which basically, if we're talking math, it multiplies the RGB channel, RGB pixels by the value of the alpha channel. You don't need to think of it like math, but I know some people it does help. Ultimately, it's just saying use the alpha channel to affect my color pixels. So when I check that box, now everything that was in my alpha channel here is now affecting my color pixels. So I've got all this set as transparent, and that is now merged on top of all the stuff that came before. So now I see the sky coming through, and that is what I did here in matte control. Now, the matte control node on its own does a lot more where you can control the matte. So we'll get to this in a little bit and maybe more tomorrow, where let's just talk about the parts of the matte. So like we have an alpha channel that we've created, but there are also pieces that we can use like with drawing shapes or other mattes that we combine. Often you're combining parts, different parts of an image. Like if we were creating a matte manually, like we could roto, making a shape around the actress's head, which moves, and then the actor's head, and then also make a shape of the background here, and then we can combine those. So you would combine those. Sometimes you merge, sometimes you use a matte control, but there are other inputs here in matte control. Um, so there is, if I look at this, there's a solid matte and there is a garbage matte. I think in the next version of this shot that I want to do is going to be easier for me to show that off, but fundamentally, just as a quick tease of that, the solid matte, anything that goes in there, you're saying, hey, matte control, anything that is in the solid matte should be solid. Let me just show that. Let's actually I'll do a circle. So I've got an ellipse going in here. I'm going to put that into my solid matte, and you can see that anything that is inside the circle, it's telling the matte like anything that's in here should be solid. So it should be opaque. So I could use that, for example, to fix some of these holes that remain. But let me do that here just so it's easy to see. And now I also have another input here. It's called garbage matte. This is the opposite of a solid matte. Anything that is in the garbage matte is garbage. Get rid of it. So let's do a rectangle. And anything that is inside this rectangle, I'll do that here, is garbage. Get rid of it. So put the output of there, right click, select garbage matte, and suddenly everything that is inside that rectangle is gone because the matte control says this is garbage, and we got rid of it. So these are additional inputs you have to affect what is a part of your matte. And we'll see some examples, I think, in the next version of this, as well as the things we do tomorrow. But ultimately, a lot of what you're doing in compositing is saying, this is my matte, bringing pieces together, ignore this, or use this, or combine things in such a way that you end up finally with the matte that you want. So it's never, not never, it is rarely just a single point and click solution. The reason for that is quality, it's control. If, you know, for example, if you're doing a lot of, if you're doing corporate video, online content, things like that, you tend to be able to do a fairly quick and dirty version of things. So if you're shooting against a green screen, and you can do a quick tool like a chroma keyer, green screen. So some of these apps just say, hey, remove the green background. And it does a pretty good job. But if you zoom in, you'll see a little bit of edge, or, you know, it's sort of a low stakes video. It's fine. But as soon as, you know, if you're working on Star Wars, they're not good with whatever background removal technology that Zoom is using on a live video. It needs to look perfect. So the idea of controlling your matte is control so that you can get it absolutely perfect and look 100% realistic as if it was actually shot that way on the day with, for example, that sky in the background instead of that sky in the background. I'm not saying that this is completely photoreal just yet, but it is better than it was. That was a lot. There's a lot to deal with mattes, but I hope that helps a bit. Sir Jack saying, except for Phantom Menace with the ridiculous light wraps. Ooh, light wraps. Yeah, that's a thing. I think we're going to do that in the advanced course. I think that would be fun to cover because it can be tough. All right. All the same step to Karen's question, just apply IntelliTrack instead of Point Tracker. Yes, if you have access to the IntelliTrack and it does the job for you, yep. Just use IntelliTrack and use that, and it'll work just fine for most things. Point Tracker, one reason you might want to use Point Tracker instead of IntelliTrack is just if you have a very simple geometric thing like this, it'll actually work just fine, but it may process faster, or if you're doing a lot of different tracks, I don't know that the extra power is going to help. But then again, yeah, if you have IntelliTrack, you might as well just use it because it's there. It's pretty good. I'm just showing off the Point Tracker because it is the default tracker when you don't have Studio. How did you do the nose tracking? Yeah, so that was me doing the IntelliTrack here. And I used a separate tracker node. So for what we've done thus far, I used a merge. We right-clicked and modified with a tracker. And so that had a tracker within this node as a modifier. But you can also use a tracker as its own separate node. And I'm using IntelliTrack, so that is Studio version only in Resolve 19 or 19.1. And then I just grabbed the tracking point, put it on her nose, and clicked track, and it did it for me. And it did a great job. All right. Good. I think we're in a good spot. What I'd like to do for the rest of today is do another version of this shot because I see that there are some confusing, some people a little confused or just it's a lot to take in. So I want to do another version of this, and we'll leave it on that with this shot today. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and do a little bit more. So reset your brain, have another snack if you want, and we'll keep working on this shot in a way that is a little different, hopefully simpler for some of you, but using different tools so we get a sense that there's a lot more that can happen in Fusion here. So we'll take 10 minutes. I'll just keep it on there, and I'll see you in a few. And we're back. Welcome back. Hope everyone's doing good, still with us. I still see plenty of people here, so that means you haven't run away screaming from Fusion, which I think is a good sign. Still with me, still willing to learn. And I'm glad. Steven's wondering if is there a runaway screaming node? Well, let's see. I hit shift space. I hit run. Oh, there's run command. Scream. Nope. I'm not seeing anything. The runaway screaming node. There's no node, but you can always go back to the ed page and just take a break. Quit the program, come back. After you've had some caffeine. Or chips and salsa. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to do this shot in an absolutely 100% different way. This is my hope here is not to confuse you, but to give you different options. Because, like I said before, this is a problem-solving task. All of VFX, all of compositing is just saying, I'm trying to solve a puzzle, and there's different ways to do it. Like we saw before, even LumaKeer, by doing something with this node, I have some tools in here, and I used Erode Dilate to solve some problems, but I also have some limited ability to contract and expand the mat directly within this node. So sometimes you may choose to use a separate node. Sometimes you may choose to do it in the same node, just like we talked about using transform controls within a merge, or using a separate node with transform. You have options. I'm also going to give you, I want to give you, as we go, some of my preferences for how I approach things, not because it's the right way to do it, but it's what makes sense to my brain. What makes sense to your brain may be different. That is okay. There's tens of thousands of compositors in the world, and not everyone works the same way. If you are a compositor and you're working for a company where multiple people may be working on the same shot, or you'll start a shot and then someone else will take it over, there tends to be some agreed upon standards within a company or within a few artists that are their uh, sharing their methodologies or templates or anything like that. But that's not because it's the right way. It's just the agreed upon way. Similarly with editorial workflows or color workflows, if you're collaborating with people within the same company or a small group of artists, you want to talk to each other and say, hey, how do you do things? How do you organize things? Some people actually, instead of doing things left to right, they'll generally work top to bottom. That's how Nuke works. If you're not familiar with it, Nuke is just another node-based compositing tool that's very popular in the VFX world, and that tends to have some built-in slightly different preferences that works top to bottom, top to bottom instead of left to right. Fusion is sort of built in this way, but you can also work in a different way. So let's do something else. We did have a question here saying, can I save a new version? And let's do that. Might as well. I'm going to open up my clips panel here. And here's a tip. I can right click on this. And if I do, I see composition 1, and that is currently checked. That means I'm working on composition 1. I can create a new composition right here. I'm going to click that. And what it's done is created a copy. So I right click. Now I can see I'm on composition 2. And it copied everything from composition 1. So nothing is different, but it's a new version effectively. If I want to go back to composition 1, I can load. And now I'm back in here. And I'll right click again, composition 2, load this. So I'm in composition 2. I'm going to close my clips panel. And let's just start destroying a few things. I'm just going to delete absolutely everything except the sky, which is what I started with. Now, if I go back to clips, right click on this, composition 1, load, everything I have is still there. I'm just now in a new version. So again, I'm going to right click, composition 2, load. Now I can see my new blank slate. Close the clips panel, and I'm back to where I started with a sky plate and absolutely nothing else. If you're not seeing anything at all, try this navigator over here. If you don't see it, hit V on your keyboard and try to navigate to where there are some nodes. It may have moved you around a bunch. If you deleted everything, then you might need to start over or just go back to composition 1. And you can also go back and make a copy of this on the edit page and work that way. You don't need to be doing the different versions that I did, the different compositions within Fusion. I just wanted to show off that feature because it's there for this reason of doing multiple versions or experimenting. You can do another version, do something else, and then come back. So we're going to do it this way, in a totally new way, so you can see what your options are. And I think we'll leave it at this different version for today. I know this is a lot, throwing a lot at you. This lesson 3, has a lot of stuff in it, and we're working with principles that we haven't touched on before, so I don't want to overwhelm you with too much. Is there an indicator of which composition version we're in? Yes. So open up Clips. You'll just need to open up your Clips panel, right click, and then see. You can see here, I have a checkbox next to the one that is currently active. If I want to go back to another one, I just hover over that, click load, and it will load that timeline or that version. And you can rename this too. So I could go to composition 1 and rename and say lesson 3 and name it that. So I can see I have lesson 3 in composition 2, and I can rename this to something different. Now I can see if I right click, I have option of lesson 3 or something different. I could create a new composition, so I create yet a new version, or I can reset Fusion composition, which absolutely deletes everything and starts from scratch, which I do not want to do. So careful with that. Here we go. Now for something completely different. I'm going to click one on my keyboard and I see my sky. And this is the sky we started with. I'm going to go to my media pool and bring in this background footage. So I've got my sky and I've got my actors. Let's rename this F2 or function F2 if you're on a Mac and your keyboard is set up that way. Let's call this actors. So far, that's actually, we're just doing the same. I still want my canvas to be the correct size. So let me add a background, hit Shift Space. I type background or BG, and I add this node. And I'm going to go to image, set this to 1920. Oops. What did I forget? Auto resolution. I need to uncheck that. 1920 by 1080. Now that is the correct size. Okay, I've got my correct size background. I merge the sky over the background. So I drag the output of the sky and I drag that over the output of the background, and that is my shortcut to create a node, a merge node. And while we're here, actually, I saw a question in here that is good to cover. So which version goes out to the edit page? Let's see, I'm on my version 2. There's something different. Let's go back to the edit page. And version 1 had the finish shot. Version 2 currently only has this sky connected to media out. So if I go back to the edit page, let's see what happens. Look at that. I'm seeing version 2 because it's just the sky. So whichever one is currently active, the one that is loaded and has the checkbox next to it, is the one that goes out to the edit page. So if ever you're working on something, and you go to the edit page, that's the one that goes to the edit page. If you use it as a separate version and it's just there for reference, make sure to go back to the one you actually want. It's easy because it's like whichever one is there that you're working on is the one that is going out to the edit page. But if you are working with different versions, just be mindful of that. Okay, so I've got my background, got the sky merged over the background so that I have the correct resolution that I want. I've got my actors, and I want to merge that over the background. So again, it's just for now putting merge. It's just putting A over B, foreground over background. So there's no transparency or alpha channel yet, but we've got a pretty good selection of just structure here of background. Then we add the sky, and then we add our actors footage on top of that, and we can start working from there. So the first thing we want to do, let's remove that sky. All we need to do is say, take these bright values, get them out of there. So we're creating a key based on luminance values. The luma keyer is still a good way to do that. So I'm going to select my luma keyer, and immediately it's selected the bright values and done something to it. Let me take a look at my alpha channel. And I need my luma keyer in my viewer. So now I'm seeing the alpha channel here. I can adjust my parameters, bring the dark parts down. Let's have that be pretty aggressive. Bring the bright parts. It's a fairly narrow range that I'm seeing here. Let's see if I go even further. So my goal here is to take as much out from the bottom area without affecting the top. If I bring this down, you can see actually I have some areas up here that's not quite white. So I'm just bringing that down so that the sky is white. Now I have a lot of stuff in the bottom here, and that's actually okay for this method. I don't care too much about that. What I really care about here is getting this edge reasonably good. I care about that edge. Everything else I can do, I can affect with a mask, which I showed off a little bit earlier with the matte control thing. But we'll be affecting this alpha channel with mattes so that we can get rid of this stuff instead of eroding and dilating as we did before. So the other thing I need to do here, if I go back to my merge, click on my color channels, I'm letting the sky through, or letting the sky is solid, everything else is transparent. That is the opposite of what I want. So I can, in my luma keyer, go back here, click invert, and already it's closer to what I want. You can see the holes that we had in our alpha channel are still there, but we will fix that. The important part is that edge is a good start. So let me view my luma keyer in my viewer. I'm going to hit A on the keyboard, view my alpha channel, and now I can start to say, let's deal with all this stuff. Now, as opposed to the erode dilate nodes to shrink holes and then grow it back, we're going to use mattes. Both methods are good options. You may actually combine the options to do some shrinking and growing and some masking. We're just going to for now, we're doing one or the other. So before we used erode and dilate, and now we're just going to use mattes. When you're working on a shot, you will often have some combination of those. So let's add a polygon. And let me actually view the color channel here because it's a little easier to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to add a node called a polygon. This is me just drawing a shape. We've used square and rectangle, or rectangle and ellipse masks before, just to create a circle and rectangle. Now I'm just going to draw a shape. So I'm going to type in polygon, or PLY as a shortcut. Now, if I view that, actually, I'm going to run into some issues here because it's also
the resolution of the shape or the image that we had before. So I want to do something so that doesn't happen. There are two options here. One, I can go to image, size, output size is custom, have the width, don't use frame format settings, and set that to 1920 by 1080. And then I can use it on this piece of footage, or I can add it with this node selected. So LumaKeyer, this, for example, is already set to 1920 by 1080. So if I add a polygon while a node is selected, it's already connected here. And if I view that, it is the correct resolution because it's connected to a node that has that resolution. So while I have actors selected, I'm going to select polygon, or sorry, actors is in the viewer, and now polygon is selected. I can click and draw. I'm not going to worry about the actors just yet. I'm mostly just drawing a quick shape so that I'm isolating the foreground. And I'm not worrying about the actors because they move quite a bit, but the background does not. And I can also just go back to where I was and affect this shape slightly just so it covers a bit more. So I'm less likely to get holes. All I'm doing here is creating a pretty simple mask for most of the background. Whereas I'm not worrying about this edge because the job of the LumaKeyer is to really create that edge for me. Now, let me go back to my LumaKeyer, A on the keyboard, and already I have a problem because currently this polygon is saying effect only within that area of my shape. So I'm going to disconnect that. And now I want to put this polygon into one of those other mask options here. We have a garbage matte and we have a solid matte. So I'm going to right click on the output of this polygon and hover over the LumaKeyer, release, and I have my options here. Let's choose solid matte and see what happens. So you can see that whole area that was full of holes before is now solid because I've told the polygon to go into the solid matte. So it's saying everything that's inside of this shape is solid. So my LumaKeyer without this is full of holes, but the edge is good. Pretty good. And now by putting the polygon into the solid matte, I'm saying everything inside it is solid. You see that there's a few issues here, here. And then as I scrub through, there's some holes in the actor's face. That is a separate thing that we will deal with. What I'm mostly worried about is the shape of the land in the background. So all of this area is filled in. Now, if I view the color channels here, again, there's more to do, like I said, but most of this area is filled in, and we have pretty good edge because of our LumaKeyer doing that. There's plenty to refine. This is just a different method. So I have this polygon that is a matte going into LumaKeyer that is a solid matte. And that's going into my merge. And I have not used any different apply modes here. I'm just creating an alpha channel with my LumaKeyer that is applied directly to this piece of footage and merging that on top of our background. So this is the background. We put the actor's plate on top of it while having the sky being transparent because of our LumaKeyer. Now, for the highlights in her face, you see there's some holes there. This is the kind of thing that, depending on the shot, if you're a VFX artist, you might do another polygon. So I can add a new polygon here. And Now there's when one polygon's going into another, it's just combining them. So this second one, I could just draw a shape generally around her face. I could use the IntelliTrack that I did before and track her nose and just have this polygon center shape move around with her. If I wanted to do it automatically, I can also do this manually because it's not actually a lot of movement. So what I can do is just start scrubbing ahead, highlight all these pieces, move that. And every time I move this, it's creating a new keyframe. So this is manual work. I know everyone likes to do things automatically and have some tools to help them, and that is very useful to have. But it's good to know how to do these things manually in case you need it. For some harder shots, it may become necessary. So you can see I've got my keyframes here, 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 and everything in between them. Obviously, it's not perfect, but it's going from one to the other. The shape is moving along between those keyframes. So what I tend to do if I'm manually rotoscoping, that's what this is, drawing, identifying a shape and drawing, is will tend to every few frames or at the beginning and the end, have set some keyframes just very roughly. Have this where I want. And I'm clicking and dragging to highlight all my points, and then I click here and move it. You can also, if I highlight all my points and I hit Option on my keyboard, I can click anywhere. So I don't need to click these points. I can click anywhere, and as long as those points are selected, I move my shape. So I have this shape moving along, and now all I need to do is go in between each keyframe that I've drawn, drag the points, and now I'm pretty quickly doing my roto, getting the shape to move where I want it to go. And there we have it. So now if I view polygon 1, that's the background, and I view polygon 2, that's the background plus this new shape I've drawn that is moving along with the actress's head. All of that is combining to make a matte that is going into the solid matte of my Luma keyer so that there are no more holes in her face. Is it perfect? No. Is it a different way of working? Yes. So you can see there's a hole there, so I can go over here and I can go to some of these keyframes, just make sure that the shape is covering all the areas I want to cover. So again, this is a very manual way of working, but you can also see that I've had a bit of practice doing this, but it's not that cumbersome once you get used to it. I'm not saying you need to do things this way, but for a lot of shots, sometimes manual works great. So I'm just moving this shape around, creating keyframes between other keyframes so that it's always in the place that I want it to be. So again, there's this polygon, and because that's feeding into this one, they combine, and both of those are going into the Luma keyer to be my solid matte. Now I can refine this. You can see there are some problems with the edge here, and Cristiano has shown that the polygon is here, so that is in your toolbar. You can also add it by hitting Shift Space and typing polygon. But my Luma keyer, I've got that here, and there's some edge issues that I may want to deal with. So it's pretty hard edges. I've got some blur tools here to blur the edge just a little bit, and then I can contract or expand the edges. Let me zoom in a lot so you can see what that does. So you can see that it shrinks the edges and refines them, and blur that more or blur it less till I get close to what I want. And then go back here, refine the shape. so that it's in the right spot. And all of that is just creating, this plate with the transparent pixels from the sky that we identified going into the merge, and we're getting our sky. We can continue to refine. For example, his face right here, we can add another polygon to this mix and do a roto of his face. We could do the method I showed before. I don't want to get into too many methods here, but why not? Let's add, I'm here, I'll add a new polygon. And I should rename this. So let's say left actor face. So this one, I'm on frame 0. I can draw a shape here, and then I can add a tracker. Going a little fast here, but this is more just to show you options. I'm not saying you need to follow along with this. So tracker there. Put that in my viewer. We've got this IntelliTrack. Let's have it track this eye, maybe. Point right here. And this is more of an experiment. So that tracks along. It's pretty good. Now I can say left actor face, go back to there. Center. So I'm right-clicking on the center of my left actor face shape. And I'm going to connect that to tracker 1, unsteady position. And that's going to marry that shape to what the tracker did. So now I didn't have to move it around manually. If I just look at this now, that shape, that moves along with his head. So again, that was using the IntelliTrack tool, which is only a studio-only feature in version 19. But that is another way to move a shape. So to recap that, that is this actor plate going into a tracker. It has IntelliTrack. You can also add a point tracker from here, which will be the only option if you are not on Studio or if you're in version 18 and before. And then just putting it on the spot you want to track, tracking forward if you're on the first frame, or track forward and backwards if you're on another frame. It will track the data, and then you can animate the position. So whatever node you're on. So this was the polygon of his face. I just drew a shape, and this is important that I started tracking on this frame and I drew the shape on this frame, which helps this stay in the place that I want it to be in. So I did that, right click center, and let's remove that and do it again. Center, right click, connect to. Before on the other version, we did modify with, and that added a new tracker. We've already created the tracker. So I don't want to modify with and create a new tracker. I want to connect to an existing tracker. I select tracker 1, which is the name of this node right here. Connect to tracker 1, and I choose, in this case, unsteady position, which is just wherever that tracker is moving around. So this is IntelliTrack 1, which is the name of that point. And now that shape moves along with the tracking that I did. And while we're here, I can use this same tracker to add another tracking point to track the background features and apply that to my sky. So let's add a new point and add a point tracker. I can uncheck this IntelliTrack checkbox here so that I'm not retracking anything. Only this new point tracker is added, and I can even double click on it to rename it. So let's say this is background point. That is the name of this tracking point. And then I can move my tracking search area or the pattern box and change the size of this search area box if I need to. But we know from before that this is a good piece to track. So I'm going to use this, and then I will click track forward. Tracks that point. And now I can, let's say, either use this merge. Sure, let's do it in the merge. So I've did something that broke that. Hang on. Let's just do that. Okay. I've got this merge over here, and I can merge, center, connect to tracker 1. Now I have more options because I have another point. So I don't want to use IntelliTrack steady position because that was the track up here. I also have the option of tracker 1 background point. That's the thing I tracked. So I choose the background point unsteady position. And now this merge, the center point of that, is going to move along with that tracking point from this tracker. So now if I play, you can see my background is moving along in the way that I want it to be moving. So again, in our previous version of the composition, we used a modifier. So everything was happening within the merge. Now we're using a separate tracking node just so it's I like this just as a preference so that I see in my node tree. I have a tracker here. It's not connected to anything else. It's just doing the tracking in here. And then I connect a center point of this merge, for example, to this tracker and this background point. All of this is covered in the PDF. I should say version 1 of what we did is covered in the PDF and much more in other lessons. So if you're not getting all of the details, that's okay. My goal for you here is that you're getting a sense of what is possible and what tools you may try to get you towards the result you want. Lucinda's asking, can you manually adjust keyframes from the tracking tool? Yes, you can. If you're using the point tracker, and I have that here, I could, if this is way off for some reason, once the track is done, I can move this around. Actually, it's not that. I'm not moving a tracking point. I have to zoom in quite a bit because you can see I have these squares here. That's for each frame. I can move those points manually if it got off of the position that it should have been. So technically I can do that if, the last frame here should actually be right there, for example. This is sort of a matter of knowing which frame is which or what position is which. So as I scroll through, you can see, now it's a little hard to see over Zoom here, but there is that indicator on the frame that I'm on. So it starts there, it moves along that path. And if that is incorrect on this frame, I can move that and manually fix a track that didn't quite do what I wanted it to do. So if that happens in a big way, it's a good idea to do what we did before where the path center is track center append and we choose a different point. But if it's just a point here and there and you can see what's happening and where it should be, it's totally fine to do that. It's just another tool in your tool belt of how to affect your track. See in the chat here, can you label a point? So yes, not an individual point along this path, but yes, the tracker that I've done. So I have 2 tracking points because I had the IntelliTrack point, which was this guy's face. So you can see that on there. And now I can uncheck that so I'm only seeing one tracker. And I have this point right here, and I've already renamed it background point. So by default, things are just point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, or IntelliTrack 1, IntelliTrack 2, etc. And if you rename it, that's good, so that when you try to adjust the center and connect it to that point, I can see tracker 1, and I'm connecting it to background point versus IntelliTrack 1 point. Whatever you name it to, it will show up here so that it's easy to keep track. If, for example, I had actor face and actress face as points that I did, I could see that in here, and I know which one I'm connecting it to. So it's a good idea to label things just so you remember what they are. IntelliTrack 1 doesn't tell you a lot, so I can have that be actor face. And now if I go to connect that somewhere here, center, connect to, tracker 1, I see that is called actor face and background point. So this is just a totally new way of approaching this shot, and probably what you would do if you were actually working on this shot and you wanted it to be absolutely perfect. You may use a combination of these methods. So it may not be just a luma keyer, but it might be the luma keyer and you use the shrink and grow to affect most of this area. And then you may also combine it with a solid matte of this general area or a solid matte of your actors' faces if they don't do quite what you want with your luma key. Usually, it's a good idea to focus your keys on giving you a good edge, because it's really annoying to roto an edge and get it perfect. It is less annoying to do a general shape to fill in holes. It's going to depend on the shot you're working on, but that is a good rule of thumb as you're getting started is let me get my edge to be good, and then I can fill in the other stuff. Like if I was getting a hole in my matte right there, I can easily just have a polygon, fill in that, use it as as a solid matte, and have it cover that area because that's nowhere near my edge. Hope that makes sense. Cool. So that's all the new stuff I want to throw at you. We can review a little bit, answer some questions, and then I'll let you go. So we've got a couple minutes left. Panelists, anything we're missing on this or questions to answer? Anything like that?
I just have to make a confession for everyone. I had to do this exercise maybe 3 or 4 times before I felt just a little bit more comfortable. So if you couldn't follow along all the steps, congratulations, you are a normal person. And it's part of the process to repeat and go through the book, right, Gedali? And I'm not
Yep.
sure if it was just me, but really, I had to redo the exercise many times until I got a good understanding. So super normal that we go step by step and reveal these new information.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Chris. That is a very good point. The book is actually throwing a lot at you. This is a lot of VFX principles and tools. So we're kind of covering a lot at once, of the principles of tracking, the principles of creating masks and keying and alpha channels, and then combining them while also oops, I'm hitting my mic. While also using tools in Fusion to create those, to identify those, to put those things together. It's a lot of pieces. If we, and we can do this, but if we did each of those pieces step by step, one thing at a time, this would be a much longer course. And I teach at a film school, and we actually do that much more step by step, but we have 15 weeks to go through this stuff, not 3 days, or 5 days in the case of the normally how certification courses run. So this is throwing a lot at you, and I want to empower you to review things on your own time, to repeat these lessons in the future, either by signing up for the other trainings or to repeat this training again next quarter, or whatever version of this training that there will be once the version 19 book is out. It's a lot. That's okay. And also, I mess this up all the time. I will be going through here and I'll be going on this and I'll put this together and say, why does that look like that? Why am I getting that edge there? And it's just something to do with how things are connected. And then I'll go, up, different image. Nope, that's still wrong. There are so many things of combining mats and shapes and all this into a way that is correct. So, you'll wind up with this, and I'll stare at it for minutes and go, I'm not sure why it's doing that. What did I do wrong? And then I will cry, and I'll call up someone smarter than me to help me. So it's okay. Take your time. There's a lot going on with these concepts, with this shot, with these tools. If you take away anything, I want you to get the idea of merging background over foreground, isolating parts of your image with shapes or keys. That's what you're doing. You're isolating a section of your image or various parts of your image based on space, based on their position with a shape, or based on their value, like their luminance value with a luma keyer. Tomorrow we'll, I think, have time to get to green screening, where we're, again, identifying pixels based on the fact of whether they're green or not. That's all this is taking different pieces, putting them together, and controlling what they're doing based on their value, their color, their brightness, or their position. Identifying pieces, like with this tracker, moving them around, and putting it together. I hope that makes sense. I hope that helps. If you're advanced, well done. You've had to practice. If you're not, this stuff takes time. And we're here to help. Our panelists have done an amazing job answering 200 questions at this point. So I hope that is at least giving you a start on your Fusion journey.
Yeah, just one more thing to add before we leave. I just would like to say to everyone that now we're gonna start repeating things, right, Gedali? We're gonna use polygon again, we're gonna use tracking again, we're gonna use matte control again. So things are gonna get easier while you are repeating, correct? In the next exercise.
Yeah, so the next exercise is, let's just do a quick preview of that, is we've got a car we're going to be tracking. So we already tracked today, but we can track the side of this car because it's moving in our shot. We're going to use a different tracking node, but it is the same principle. So now that you know the principle of tracking is just we're identifying features in our image and seeing how they move, then we can use the same tool or use a different tool, but it's the same principle. And then we're taking a logo and putting that on top here. So that's merging. That is just taking one thing, putting it over something else, and tracking it to go along with our shot. We're going to use merge. We're going to use matte control. We're going to use a polygon. And we'll use some new nodes as well. But a lot of what we've done so far moves into the next exercise to help you. So we're building on what we've learned today and reviewing it, because you're going to use this for, like, most VFX shots are some version of tracking, keying, roto, merging. It's just that, and it just gets to be a more complex version of that, a lot more to keep track of. But this is what you do. yeah, any final questions we should get to here?
No, I think we're
Yes.
good. I think we're good.
Nope. Noel's got something?
Yes,
Yeah,
keep
no.
in mind that there are many ways of achieving a similar result, and these techniques that Hedali used will work with most cases and will solve many problems that you might encounter in the future. Maybe this particular shot can be solved with a few nodes and other techniques, but the row delay technique will give you the possibility to work in other shots in the future and solve almost any problem that you might encounter.
Yeah. Thanks for that. There's a lot here, and yes, like I said, these are principles, and we figure out different ways to apply them. There are a couple questions here that are related that I might as well address. Jamal is asking, I'm saying I'm not switching, but is Nuke more capable than Fusion? I did mention that Nuke is another popular VFX tool that is also a node-based compositor. The short answer is Fusion is 98% of what Nuke could do for about 2% of the cost. Uh, there are some cheaper versions of Nuke, but it is very expensive. It is used, like there is a reason it is a standard for a lot of VFX houses, but a lot more are either used Fusion well before Blackmagic acquired it, and many are coming back to it. Almost everything, like 98% of everything, is the same. Some things have different names, but the workflow is very similar. There are other tools that are often helpful for really big VFX houses to collaborate between artists and stuff like that, but a lot of that is possible with Fusion standalone and things like that. For most cases, Fusion will do absolutely everything you need to do for VFX compositing. If you have an exception, then you're probably already very advanced or working for a large VFX post house. I've worked on short films and feature films using just Fusion within DaVinci Resolve, and I haven't run into a limitation yet. Not saying I'm working at the top end of the industry, but I know people who are working on things like Star Wars, and I'll compare notes with some of the types of things that they do, and it's the same sort of thing that we're working on here in Fusion. I thought there was another. Oh yeah, I did see a question about 3D. I think that may have been answered, but we will cover some 3D stuff in the advanced course. So Fusion does have a 3D system where we can both do motion graphics and compositing in a 3D space. We're not covering that this week, but we will touch on it a little bit. And there are lessons. So we'll touch on that a little bit in the advanced course in a couple weeks. And there's also lessons on that in the book that I believe we will be referencing. On that note, I'll let you go. For me, it's time for lunch. For you in other parts of the world, it might be time for dinner, might be time to go to bed. So wherever it is, wherever you are, thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you back here tomorrow. We'll review and we'll learn some new things. Thanks again for taking the time to be here to learn with us. I appreciate you just being so supportive of each other and of what we're doing here in the chat. I see a lot of great comments, so that makes me feel nice. I know Blackmagic is grateful to have such enthusiastic users. I'm grateful that we have so many willing and eager participants, and I'm grateful for you panelists for working so hard and answering so many questions. So again, great work. Stick with it. Rest your brains, and I will see you here tomorrow, same time, same Zoom. So long.